Bhutan, you have to send those
We are
words
live.
again.
Okay. Good evening to all in South Asia, and a very good afternoon to our audience and our dear friends from Tunisia and other parts of North Africa. It is with great excitement that we begin this 2-day webinar jointly organized by Doris Lessing Society South Asia and Doris Lessing Society North Africa. We have to mention the support that comes from the Center for Studies in Gender, Culture and Media, West Bengal State University, India. The webinar is the third international event that is being organized by DLSSA, while it marks the inauguration of DLS North Africa. The webinar also marks 10 years of the demise of Doris Lessing, the Nobel laureate and an iconoclast whose writings spread over the 5 decades of the second half of 20th century. They continue to impress, influence, and raise many hackles. Lessing straddled the boundaries of the global North and global South. And although a repatriate British citizen in London, she considered Africa to be her home and expressed her anguish when she had to stay away from it. Doris Lessing, in whose writings the home is a little hut in the Copier, as well as the galactic spaces such as the Earth, explored the myriad emotions and compulsions that one may associate with the word home. Her writings have taught us to regard both homemaking and the forced and callous destruction of homes and houses that were homes once. She is also the great chronicler of wars that break homes, force people out of homes, and lead to the birth of children of violence. Lessing considered herself to be one. The, the children of violence, as we come understand from her writings and as we can understand from our experience of the world around us, live with war as their only truth. In a time when war continues to be the unhomely, the uncanny, and the children of violence look at the mayhem, whether in Palestine, Ukraine, Manipur, or whichever place affected by terrible man made discord. They look with dismay, hoping to be saved by a savior, to be led to safety by what Lessing would perhaps say a seer. In a time when we are looking for seers, Lessing's writing make further inroads and lead to fresh insights. This webinar, which says Quest for Truth, the Quest for Home, Woman in the World, not of it, um, is going to try to make and find the meanings of new homes in these troubled times. Before we go on, I would request Professor Radha Chakraborty, Professor Comparative Literature and Translation Studies, and former Dean International Affairs, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar University, Delhi, India, a foremost translator, poet, author. Professor Chakraborty is DLSS's very honored, respected, and loved mentor. I would request her to present the welcome address. Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to speak to all of you at the beginning of the third international event organized by DLSSA. And this webinar, as we heard, is organized this time by the Doris Lessing Society South Asia in association with DLS North Africa and supported by the Center for Studies in Gender, Culture and Media at the West Bengal State University. So I would congratulate all these groups for coming together in organizing what sounds like a wonderfully meaningful and relevant activity, I think, given the moment that we are living in today at this time. And the subject of the seminars seems equally appropriate, although I think when we were planning it, we had not quite anticipated the kind of crisis the world finds itself in today, because it is called The Quest for Home: Women in the World, Not Out of It. And suddenly, words like home, women, and world have begun to resonate with us in very, very dark, haunting, and meaningful ways. Lessing has this uncanny way of getting under our skin. Whatever crisis the world goes through, somehow her words seem to resonate and acquire new shades of meaning when we read her works and look at the world through the lens of her vision. Because her vision is always so stimulating and always challenges us to, do a fresh take on the way we have been thinking about things. So, the Doris Lessing Society of South Asia, I think I would like to congratulate them because the group has made giant strides since its inception. Having grown from a small committed group of Doris Lessing enthusiasts to a forum where now students, researchers, and faculty from different parts of India and the world can come together for new reappraisals of Doris Lessing's writings and what they mean to us today. It is particularly heartening to note that this webinar has drawn such a large response from younger readers of Lessing, because it is in their hands that the future of Doris Lessing studies will rest in the years to come. So I congratulate this forum for bringing together young minds along with some of the leading scholars of Lessing from different parts of the world, because this is where I think the path opens up for the future of Doris Lessing studies in South Asia. It's also a pleasure to see the participation from Tunisia, Algeria, Rome, and even China. And we would like to here acknowledge the encouragement and inspiration we have consistently received from Josna Rege, as a nodal figure in Doris Lessing studies across the world. It's also, I think, a matter of pride to announce that the special issue of the Doris Lessing newsletter, which will bring together the papers presented at the previous Doris Lessing conference organized by this group, is well on the way. And I would like to congratulate DLS SA and all those associated with the newsletter for making this happen, because it is a new and important way of bringing current South Asian responses to Doris Lessing to readers across the world. So congratulations, and I think we're all waiting eagerly for the new issue of the newsletter to come. Um, the range of subjects that we see in the program here is again very interesting to my mind and very diverse. The papers all focus on ideas of women and the home, women and the ideas of home, and we see such a wide range of responses. The idea of women recreating or reinventing themselves, papers on otherness, historicization and dehistoricization, ideas of the maternal. Very importantly, so many papers that take a comparative approach to Lessing, because we see papers that offer comparative studies of Lessing read in relation to writers like Ismat Chugtai, Anita Desai, Nawala Sadawi, Fadia Fakir, Kamla Das, and bringing the story up to date, Gitanjali Shri. So the wide potential of comparative readings of Lessing from different contexts is very much, I think, represented in the program here. Then we also find some very topical issues that are about the problems that haunt our planet today. Ecofeminism, women and terrorism. These are so real for us And I'm very happy that people have had the courage to pick up these subjects to talk about in this seminar. These contemporary rereadings will draw attention to Lessing's continued relevance to the world we inhabit today. Because as we grapple with the current world order, where violence, hate, destruction, war, and forced homelessness have become increasingly hard to control, Lessing's writings appear prophetic all over again. And they call for urgent rereadings to remind us that literature can continue to offer a space for the negotiation of the large issues that affect our world, and that literature can offer the vital possibility of imagining meaningful alternatives to address our current realities. Because in Lessing, we see both a dystopian vision of what she sees is wrong with the world, but also a determined kind of utopianism and a determination to think of other ways in which we can inhabit our world. I congratulate the organizers, especially Swati, Ratna, Ujjaljeet, Chandraga Chakravarti, and the others for this wonderful initiative. And I wish the webinar all success. Thank you.
Thank you, Radhadi. I think that kind of summed up what we need, what we are going to look forward to from now on for the next 2 days. And that was a wonderful, as usual, wonderful welcome address. And before long, we go on to the first keynote address that we have today. That is going to be from our friend from Tunisia, Dr. Hanin Baroumi, Faculty of Social and Human Sciences, Tunis, Tunisia, the house in the home, women recreating themselves and their homes. So,
okay. So, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Yes, shall I start?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for your hospitality in organizing such an amazing event where we can share some thoughts and reflections on the legacy of Doris Lessing, along with other women from the world, because I think that Doris Lessing opened these possibilities to listen to women from different spaces, homes. And she was welcoming differences and different stories. So thank you very much. I hope that we would have a nice discussion of Doris Lessing's works in relation to other writers and works. So I will share my screen with you. Just bear with me. Can you see it? Yes?
Yeah, we can. Thank you.
Okay, good. So I chose to title my talk "The House and the Home" to show the limits between this idea or conception of house and home as separate units, as we would focus on fluidity between the two and how they intersect in women's attempt to recreate themselves or their stories and homes. So I thought that this cartoon, which is the cover of the New Yorker, showing Obama, by the way, it was issued in 2008. It shows Barack Obama and Michelle Obama. And there is a reference. Of course, there is the American flag that is burnt. We have the Osama bin Laden picture on the wall. And we have, so if we are going to read it or think about it, there are many illusions. So we have the idea of thinking about Barack Obama's origin, homeland, his relation to the house, the White House. And as you can see, black terrorists in the White House. This was supposed to be a satire by the cartoonist, but if we dig deeper, the image of Michelle Obama calls the image of women within the Black Panther movement, Black women as terrorists, Black women as attempting to break or challenge the House of the USA. And there is always, as well, the idea of the Arab and the Muslim in the White House, all in relation to the idea of terrorism, hospitality, welcoming Barack Obama into the House, legacy, questioning his legacy, etc. So, along with this cartoon, I chose to share with you those quotes by Derrida and Doris Lessing, of course. So the first quote is from Philosophy in a Time of Terror. And here we have the reading, contemplation or reflection on the idea of terrorists. So here I am reading Derrida's words. Those called terrorists are not, in this context, others, absolute others, whom we as Westerners can no longer understand. We must not forget that they were often recruited, trained, and even armed, and for a long time in various Western ways by Western world that itself, in the course of its ancient as well as very recent history, invented the word, the techniques, and the politics of terrorism. Next, one has to divide, or at least differentiate, all the wholes or groups to which we might be tempted to attribute responsibility for this terrorism. It's not the Arabs in general, nor Islam, nor the Arab Islamic Middle East. Each of these groups is heterogeneous, filled with tensions, conflicts, and essential contradictions. Within truth, what we have been calling self-destructive, quasi-suicidal, autoimmunitary processes. The same goes for the West, what is, to my eyes, very important for the future. The second quote is from his text of Hospitality. It is always about answering for a dwelling place, for one's identity, one's space, one's limits, for the ethos as abode, habitation, house, hearth, family, and home. And finally, a quote by Doris Lessing from The Good Tourist. The taxi man said it was a shocking thing. Probably those Arabs again. They had no sense of the sacredness of life. Not like the Westerners. If he had his way, he would stop the Arabs from coming here. So basically, those quotes would eliminate a discussion on the idea of terror, violence, race, hospitality, homeland, hostland, houses, and homes. So Derrida's examination of terrorism and his rethinking of hospitality, along with the cartoon, signal a need to reconsider the figurations of othering practices in text and context. Derrida coins this word hospitality to unveil some hostile or violent aspects of hospitality, as this capacity to welcome others, strangers, and foreigners into the space of one's house or home, opening up questions on the name of others, textual ability to host or welcome the unexpected. Indeed, thinking of otherness as a consequence of marginalization and uprootedness ponders these questions. Who is the other and the stranger in the world, in the house? Which world or house do we belong to? How can women terrorists construct their experiences homes in an unhomely world where differences are often resisted? Drawing on these questions, I will begin by extending these critical questions to Doris Lessing and Bakkar's text. So, Tunisian playwright Jalila Bakkar and British writer Doris Lessing include similar inquiries in Khamsoon and The Good Tourist, as they invite readers to listen to the fragmented stories of two women, female terrorists, who rebel against injustices, Judah and Alice. And here I would like to comment on the meaning of the names and on the naming. So probably Lessing and Bakkar chose those names, which both by coincidence refer to this idea of nobility, greatness, great deeds. So Judah and Alice. Both characters, they moved from one house to another as they were in search for their identities. The scars and the battered bodies remind them of childhood traumas and initiate their search for a home. So In order to find a home, these women seem to be dissatisfied with the personal, political, and social situation. They return to violence and terrorism. And as they embrace terrorism, they thought that it gives them agency in the act of creating alternative homes, their own homes, which refer to the idea that they could break social and feminine rules. Both texts re-examine some critical moments in Tunisian or British history. They tell the story of young people who fall into extremism and despair. Khamsoon, literally 50 years from independence, are exposed and criticized. So the main story of Amal, meaning hope, who was raised in a Marxist and family to fall prey to a group of extremists, traces the roots of the expanding inclination among young people to embrace extremism and violence. The same is with Alice, and the book traces her journey with fellow terrorists who create their own home to plot bombing and terrorist attacks. In a similar context, French theorist Hélène Sixou explained in The Laugh of the Medusa that women have been turned away from their bodies, shamefully taught to ignore them, to strike them with that stupid sexual modesty. Women's venture to write their stories can take some radical forms. She notes, when the repressed of their culture and their society returns, it is an explosive, utterly destructive, staggering return with a force never yet unleashed or equal to the most forbidding of expressions. So in here, we notice that the muffled stories and histories of Alice and Judah seem to generate their revolt and their terrorist actions. So women's repressed memories and voices, which would refer to the repressed in their culture, society, and political laws as well, is associated or manifested in the instances of this destructive return of a violent and repressed bodies. Because of their alienation and exile, Judah and Alice, in both texts, seem to speak a dangerous revolt, to borrow Sixou's words. Both characters have major commonalities, as they endorse terrorism in the case of Alice and female jihadism in the case of Judah. The writers in here explore women's capacity or dangerous attempts to create homes of their own or to deform the notion of home. Both texts use feminine voices that foreground the recovery of the female experience or body through a transition from innocence to experience. And we have extracts and passages in both texts where we have those moments where Alice and Judah oscillate between memories of the past and this longing for a home, as they seem to be fellow sufferers with the maternal, with the paternal, with the families, with society at large. So becoming terrorist, and here I borrow this notion of becoming from Deleuze. Becoming a terrorist is a gesture that challenges their passive responses to reality, as it enables them to fly and not just feel, but always escape from the past trauma. And commenting on this idea of becoming a terrorist, what is interesting in the text, this act of becoming is synonymous with this capacity to fly, not just simply to feel violence or to inscribe violence into other bodies, but becoming a terrorist enables them to escape from the past, from the trauma of their past. Of course, here Sixou, Derrida, Bakar, and Lessing seem to share a pointed reflection on the meaning of being stranger, being and welcoming foreigners in a world inhabited by questions and stories about the self and its many others. Like the cartoon that we have in the beginning of the talk, we have this desire or this incessant request to think about people who are different from us as strangers, as foreigners who might threaten the house or the home. So basically, as an alternative, Bakar and Lessing decided to delve into the realm of the underground, the realm of the other, the foreigner, the stranger, to underline some possibilities of rethinking terror and the revolt. And probably here, Doris Lessing, through the name of Alice again, is referring to Alice in Alice Adventure in Wonderland, an allusion to the nonsense of the house, to the nonsense of the world that we live in. So that's why this failed attempt to belong created this longing to deformed houses. So questions about belonging and identity, they seem to fail. They are even banal. It is the representation of strange homes, deformed homes, not houses that bear the suffering and trauma of existence. That is to say, injustice and despair in their stories. From a similar context, in The Wretched of the Earth, Frantz Fanon reveals how terror and oppression breeds violence and violent individuals who are doomed to live by violence and fall prey to violence. Fanon reminds us that violence is man recreating himself. So it's an attempt to l'écrit, the screams, into l'écrit, the writing. So basically, it's an attempt to voice a long history of violence by creating a counter-violence. This is not to say that terrorism should not be condemned, but there is this interview by Lessing which inspired me to think beyond the question of terrorism, analyzing terrorism from different angles, the psychoanalytical, the sociological, the economic, political as well. Because Lessing, as she was talking about the book, The Good Terrorist, she said that it would be interesting if we focus on the female representation of this terrorism. Why women, or why do women resort to violence? What are the reasons? So basically, we are in no position to sympathize with those female terrorists, but we want to understand how they chose this weapon or this context of violence in order to create this idea of a possible home. So basically, in Bakar's book and Lessing books as well, we have two female protagonists who have similar trajectories as they rebel against their own people. By consequence, there is violence as terrorism, which becomes a force for change for the female protagonists at the formed homes. Again, it's very interesting to think about the quote that I shared with you in the beginning about apart from the cartoons satire, we have the quote by Lessing, and it generates this satire when media talked that probably, or the taxi driver was thinking that probably it was an Arab attack, the terrorist must be Arab. So in here, we have similar reflections on assumptions that are associated with the idea of hospitality, welcoming differences. Against these local and global politics of marginalization, of excluding differences, of being afraid of differences, Judah and Alice decided to embrace violent and dissident roles. They thought that, like Sixu would say, they thought that the repressed of their past culture, society return. It's explosive, of course, but it shows that there is an attempt to challenge the patriarchal and global representation of a silenced and docile women, and not just Arab and Muslim women, since we are talking about Doris Lessing's text. So in here, we have two quotes that would elucidate this idea of women who are longing for recognition and agency, and this longing drive them to a new home or the creation of a deformed home where fellow sufferers seem to resort to violence. So Lessing points to the anger that Alice has. And similarly, we have a description of Judah, who was angry. She bore great anger. Why? The situation of Arabs and Muslims, their lost dignity and pride. So basically, both attempt to depict a picture or to share some thoughts on the reason of the protagonist's anger. This idea of being anger or an angry stranger could be read in the context of what theorist Julia Kristeva referred to as being stranger to oneself. So women are represented with fragmented identities. Their failed attempt to belong created this hidden face of their identities, and they seem to rebel against their societies and communities to create imaginative societies, to borrow this term. Again, we have this idea of these women as they are strangers to their bodies, experiences, and voices, as they fail to belong. Questions about becoming a terrorist, becoming a stranger in life and death may lead us to think about the examination of concepts such as justice and freedom. The ghost of the stranger or the terrorist seems to unveil the precarity and marginality of women's and their stories. So, for Bakar and Lessing, their texts become, in one way or another, their homes. They attempt to study the voices of the unrepresentable women who would challenge our perception of homes. In doing so, the self-other dichotomy represented in the discourses, or the politics of belonging, or what John Crowley defined as the dirty work of boundary maintenance, become subject to change and renewal as one enters into conversation with his or her own speech and views on the house and the home. In a similar context, Lessing says, people in the West, therefore, may go through their entire lives never thinking to analyze this very flattering picture, and as a result, are helpless against all kinds of pressures on them to conform in many kinds of ways. Reflections on the stories of a foreigner can be traced in texts as they expose the experiences of women as discard the human state of loss, to embrace a root of terror, becoming strangers to their bodies, histories, and themselves. The protagonists oscillate between being the other and becoming terrorists. The terrorist becomes an unsettling figure for the order of men, for the order of the house. She is the stranger who unsettles the comfort of being human. It is equally important to examine the stances of the foreigner as they unveil the historical and cultural overlap between life and death, the self and the other, and the East and the West in women's stories. Stories from below, as Bakar and Lessing invite us to think about them, allow the reader to think about the life and death experiences of women at the margin of society. Alice and Judah's foreignness encompasses several layers of interpretations, since it unveils a long history of injustice where their voices and stories were suppressed and mutilated. They become strangers in life. Being a stranger and a foreigner is at the heart of our interpretation of the self and the world. The choice we make to welcome or exorcise the other, who is the foreigner and the stranger, is pivotal to understand this journey in the world or into the house, the home. So one might wonder here, what does death, mourning, have to do with terror and violence in those texts? Death by despair, probably, or life by despair, mourning the thwarted promises of life, possibly, but one doesn't want to incriminate oneself with an answer. Probably it would be better to think about what Bakar and Lessing thought about this question, as they were examining notions of justice, the protagonist's childhood, the difficult transition from innocence to experience, and how they thought about belonging as they tell stories about uprooted women who struggle with life, death, and questions of longing and belonging. Um, I would share with you this quote by Bakar. You will never understand what I'm living now. You are too remote from this reality, from my experience. You will never understand. End of the quote. Another quote from the Good Tourist. Alice always at once allowed herself, as she did now, to slide back into her childhood, where she dwelt pleasurably on some scene or other, walking into a story that began once upon a time there was a little girl called Alice who heard mother. These quotes illuminate this idea of being in between, of longing for a belonging, for this capacity to or incapacity to belong in the world. As a result, these women created deformed homes. They thought that violence and terrorism could be an answer to their failure to express themselves, express their past traumas and realities. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Hanan Barumi. She began with the White House and took us through the alleys of many feminist theories, um, and came to the very understanding and question of becoming, given that there is an idea of becoming a terrorist and being a woman, maybe the being and the becoming which merges and also determined by people and forces which are not one's own. Both the writers here, Lessing and Vakar, they are talking about how women kind of need to become and need to be, and yet they are never what they are. Um, now, before we go on to the next session, there's something which was so interesting. She said, "Should I begin?" And I said, "Okay, go for it." And the very vital thing that we often do in formal seminars is we give brief introduction to our, especially to our keynote speaker. So we are kind of making it the structure, we are reworking the structure of a formal webinar here. And so the formal introduction to the presenter of that fascinating paper comes here like this. Professor Hanan Barumi is Associate Professor of English Literature at the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences of Tunis, which is University of Tunis. She holds an MA in cross-cultural politics from ISLT of University of Carthage, Tunisia, and a PhD in literature from the faculty of Manouba, Tunisia. She participated in many conferences and workshops in Tunisia, Germany, Qatar, and Algeria. She won a research grant and visited the State University of New York, USA. Her research interests are in literary and cultural studies, North African and Maghrebian literature, and women and gender studies. However, I think the best and perhaps the most enduring introduction that Buthana gave me about her is she is passionate about literature, and she just proved it with both her paper and her deliverance of it. So thank you so much, Professor Hanene. That
Thank you very much.
was such a rewarding experience. And we go on to a first business session with Ratna Raman, Professor um, Venkateshwara College, New Delhi, who's going to chair it. But we are very happy that Professor Wang Hang Cheng of Beijing, China, has been able to join us. We were worried, we were a little apprehensive, and she was more than worried and apprehensive. But we are so, so happy that she is here with us. And we will hear her after the first business session. Before the usual kind of thing that moderators have to do often. In the chat box, there's a link that have sent and will be sending from time to time. It is a registration link for all participants. Let us have all the participants, including those who are chairs. If you could just take some time out, or just keep the link somewhere open in the browser and do it later. We will need all the details for our usual certificates or letters, or those formalities which are not really important but which we have to do. So thank you so much, and over to Ratna, Professor Ratna Raman, Venkateshwara College, New Delhi, India, and the business session first. Ratna, you're muted. Ratna, you're muted.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. We are now beginning the first business session, session one of day one. And while I welcome everyone to these online proceedings, something that has been made possible, something that has also been made very relevant in the times that we live in, and the various geographical latitudes and longitudes that we occupy, to say nothing of the political and the economic ones. This session is titled Lessing Through the Comparative Lens. And I have three speakers with me: Dr. Shambhu, who is a professor in English at NSS College, Pandalam; Dr. Ujjwaljeet, who teaches at Guru Nanak Dev University, Amritsar; and Dr. Mohammad Anis Farchichi from Tunis, the University of Carthage in Tunisia. So let me begin by introducing Dr. Shambhu. He has a paper in which he is reconceptualizing notions of home, female space, and autonomy in Ismat Chughta's The Quilt and Doris Lessing's to Room 19. Dr. Shambhu teaches English at NSS College in Pandalam, Kerala, and he has a doctoral thesis on the selected works of J.G. Ballard and David Cronenberg. He also has published 3 edited volumes on the post-human question. So, post-human ontologies, politics of nonconformity, and post-animality. And he has also he has also made contributions to several journals to which he has submitted his essays. And he has also brought out a preface to post-human thinking, he has an essay in preface to post-human thinking, which is the first Malayalam anthology of essays on post-humanism in 2021. So I welcome you, Dr. Shambhu, as the first speaker in this business
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Good evening to you all, Honorable Chair and fellow presenters. The title of my paper is Reconceptualizing Notions of Home, Female Space and Autonomy in Doris Lessing's To Room 19 and Ismat Chughta's The Quilt. How much time do I have, ma'am?
I think you have 15 minutes.
Okay. I will try to make good use of my time then. Okay. Yeah. So, ma'am, let me begin. So my paper attempts a comparative reading of Doris Lessing's short story To Room 19 alongside the Urdu writer Ismat Chughta's short story The Quilt in a multicultural framework so as to arrive at notions of female selfhood and autonomy. As you all know, the notion of home is one that is encountered often in feminist literature, wherein it appears as a private space of intimacy, personal emotion, and relationship. Home has often been invoked as a constraining label encompassing the silenced lives of women distanced by a phallogocentric regime from mainstream political processes. As a space where women excluded from important socio-cultural events could find solace in conjugal rights and culinary practices, home has always occupied a controversial place in feminist literature, where its balance of obligations and securities have largely figured as the machinations of a male-dominated order to circumscribe the unlimited potential of women. The present paper considers the idea of home as an oppressive place for women in the selected short story of Doris Lessing and Ismet Chugtai, who, despite their cultural differences, are united in their condemnation of the subtle forms of female oppression that go unnoticed in seemingly liberated settings. If there is a common theme that undergirds Lessing's writing, it is that of home in relation to questions of national identity and gender. Lessing's writing has always been sensitive to the politics of space, both domestic and public, and how they define the contours of the female self. In her short story, To Room 19, Lessing turns the private world of her protagonist, named Susan, inside out so as to give the readers a peek into the intricacies of the female subconscious as it militates against the constraining labels of a patriarchal society. Lessing depicts how Susan, despite enjoying an outwardly blemishless domestic life, withdraws to the sanctuary of a hotel room to reclaim her identity and independence when her conjugal as well as maternal obligations take her selfhood away from her. Tired of acting like an automaton to uphold the gender codes circumscribing her identity, Susan starts shedding the social garbs she has accumulated over the years one by one till she finds her life voided of all culturally created meaning. Lessing's story destabilizes the trope of the angel in the household, which is firmly anchored in Anglo-American cultural imagination. It repudiates the linking of domesticity to an implied feminine essence and argues that middle-class women are lured into the confines of suburban housewifery by extolling their angelic qualities that are supposed to derive from their self-effacing love for the family. Lessing uses the trope of a journey as evidenced by the use of the preposition to in the title of the short story to demonstrate an alienated woman's retreat from the family environment into her inner self. Although this active retreat is redolent of an escapist fantasy, Lessing disrupts the reader's identification of Susan with the image of a criminally unsatisfied woman seeking adventure outside home by representing her desire for a few hours of anonymous existence in a hotel room as a last straw attempt to reconnect with her older self. Lesson begins the story by painting an idyllic picture of the family life that Matthew and Susan Rollins, an intellectual couple, enjoy. With their high-paying jobs and liberal attitudes towards gender and sexuality, the couple compose what Lessing calls, and I quote, a balanced and sensible family, end quote. But somehow the relationship begins to fall apart when Susan leaves her home, leaves her job to become a housewife, leaving Matthew to be the sole breadwinner of the family. Susan's woes are only compounded when Matthew admits to having an affair. Though hurt on the inside by his infidelity, Susan decides to put the incident behind her and move on, since the reasons that their marriage, which is built on intelligence, their marriage, which is built on intelligence, must steer clear of, and I quote, quarreling, accusations, and tears, end quote. Soon, all her children go off to school, and the lonesome emptiness of the big house becomes too much for her to bear. Susan, who had till then busied herself with household chores, finds her life bereft of all purpose all on a sudden. She realizes that although she's free for 7 hours a day till the children return, she is not really free from the pressure of time, from having to remember this or that. Her freedom pivots on not being pestered by the maid or not receiving calls from the school, and not on her ability to live life on her terms. Susan comes to link her overwhelming desire for anonymity to the suffocation she feels from the burden of social roles that have accreted over her identity. From being a wife and mother of four, she now wants to be a nobody. And it is this search for her lost selfhood that takes her to Room 19. Lessing presents Room 19 as the externalization of that unappropriated space in Susan's psyche to which she withdraws to reclaim her autonomy. Susan is able to transcend the entrapment of her home environment by means of the spiritual withdrawal into room 19, which serves as her new home. The hotel room functions as a projection of Susan's desire for a place where she can ask herself the Wolfian question, who am I? And get a response to it that is not determined by the social roles she fulfills. The room is a symbol of Susan's defiance of the patriarchal order that seeks to contain her vitality. The sanctuary it affords helps her redefine home as a place where she is able to express herself fully without being constrained by her social roles. Although Susan's wool gathering connotes stultification, it enables her to channel her creative energies in the right direction. It is her indolent meditation in room 19 that redeems her femininity, turning her ostensible inactivity into the most meaningful period of her life. Although Susan commits suicide at the end of the story in room 19, her suicide cannot be considered an act of escapism. Rather, it is an act in which she reclaims her identity. If in Lessing's To Room 19, female autonomy is realized through the freeing of creative impulses caught in the deadlock of repressive masculine ideologies, in Ismet Chughai's The Veil, it is the smuggling of homoerotic drives into a heterosexual order that achieves the same goal. Most of Chughai's stories deal with the unbridgeable gulf between the public and the private sphere, and that is the case with the story Lihaf, which is translated as The Quilt. The story was published in 1942, almost 3 decades before Lessing's story came out. It eloquently articulates the discriminatory praxis ingrained in masculinist ideologies and argues in favor of the creation of an autonomous female space. The story earned considerable notoriety for the transgressive depiction of lesbianism and was at the center of an obscenity trial held in 1945 to tarnish Chughai's reputation as a nonconformist writer. The Quilt begins with the female narrator's reminiscence of an erotic episode that she had occasion to witness as a young girl. The incident took place during her stay at Begum Jan's house, where her mother had deposited her before leaving for Agra. The girl, who is now in her womanhood, forewarns the reader that the quilt in question is not hers and that the incident has been excavated from the recesses of her memory. She discredits the romantic potential of her own quilt, which, and I quote, does not cast any terrifying shadows quivering on the wall, end quote. When she arrives at Begum Jan's house, she notices that Begum Jan, the wife of the Nawab, is pining away in the seclusion of her bedroom, as the Nawab is interested only in young, fair, and slim-waisted boys. From the initial days of marriage, Begum is fated to climb the four-poster bed alone and count her days listlessly in the darkness of her bridal chamber. It is with the arrival of the masses Robo that Begum Jan undergoes a change. The narrator observes that Robo is always massaging Begum Jan's head, feet, or some other part of her anatomy behind closed doors. Since Robo is the only one allowed inside Begum's bedroom, none of the other maids have a clue what is really going on there. The narrator, who sleeps in Begum Jan's room at night, discovers her quilt shaking vigorously as if an elephant was struggling beneath it. She thinks at first that the convulsions of the quilt are caused by Robo gorging on delicacies brought for her mistress, who has not eaten a thing all day. But as she draws nearer, the scent that is wafted to her is not that of food, but the mingled aroma of sandalwood, attar, and henna. As the quilt continues to assume weird shapes, her childish curiosity gets the better of her. In the face of the mystery and terror the sight evokes, the narrator flicks on the switch. Just then the elephant in the quilt somersaults, causing its corner to be lifted and the secret to be revealed. Chughai takes care not to reveal the ending of the story. However, the ambiguous tone of the ending confirms the homosexual relationship between Robo and Begum Jan. The narrator's assertion that, and I quote, she will never tell anyone, not even if they give me a lakh rupees, end quote, communicates the extent of her startlement at what she has witnessed. The narrator's self-imposed secrecy also hints at Chughai's elevation of the private sphere of the quilt to an ideal of female autonomy that must resist being judged by recourse to the repressive moral codes installed by the patriarchal order. In conclusion, I would like to say that Lessing's To Room 19 and Chughai's The Quilt Both these stories analyze the challenges faced by female protagonists in reclaiming their identity. Despite coming out of different cultural milieus, both Blessing and Chipta have shown an uncanny sensitivity to veiled forms of patriarchal oppression originating in the domestic sphere. Their preoccupation with women's self fulfillment and stifling domestic settings echo the ubiquity of the problems married women face worldwide. In both stories taken for study here, the female protagonist fights against masculine ideologies by activating an intermediary space found in the overlaps between the dominant discourse and what it eschews. Also noteworthy is the fact that they do not resort to any reactionary rhetoric or transient activism like popular feminist heroines. Like Susan's resistance to the complacency her social roles induce in her, Begum Jan's defiance of a life of loneliness is conducted away from the male representation ladder. In the end, the parallel worlds conjured up by the protagonists remain intact without their integrity being eroded by the intrusion of patriarchal values. In their own distinct ways, both female protagonists topple the tyranny of the heteronormative patterns structured around them and construct a third space unadulterated by misogynistic perceptions. Thank you.
Okay. Uh, Thank you so much, Dr. Sambhu. I'm now going to move on to our next speaker.
Thank you.
This is Dr. Ujaljit, and sorry, just a minute. This is Dr. Ujaljit, and while I welcome her to while I welcome her to speak, her paper is a comparative study of Doris Lessing's Grass is Singing and Anita Desai's Cry the Peacock under the title Home for Women and Women for Home. Dr. Ujjwal Jeet is an assistant professor at the Department of English, Guru Nanak Dev University, Amritsar. Her research interests include approaches of systemic functional linguistics and semiotic analysis to investigate power relations existent in society. She is also a great fan of the Nobel laureate British African author Doris Lessing and a member of the Doris Lessing Society and its South Asia chapter. She is also a life member of the Linguistic Society of India and the Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage. And Ujjwal, as you can see, contains multitudes. She has presented her research work and has published severally. Over and above her academic work, Ujjwal also writes stories and poems under the pen name of Ujjwala Bhati. So I will invite this teacher, researcher, poet, short story writer, mentor, and someone who also reads out her creative writings to speak to all of us. Welcome, Ujjwal.
Ujjwal, you're muted. Ujjwal, you're muted.
Okay, for a moment,
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Ratna, for this wonderful introduction. Um, my thanks to everyone for giving me this opportunity once again to be part of this wonderful group of scholars, a very esteemed gathering of scholars. As Ratna has already told you, the topic on which today I am speaking is Home for Women and Women for Home. This is a comparative study of Lessing's The Grass is Singing and Anita Desai's Cry the Peacock. Home in its most conventional sense of the term not only refers to the habitat for the human species, but also a product of consciousness of ownership and belongingness. Home also entails the spaces where we feel at home. It is through that relation between self and place that we come to know in our bones how home is tied to our identity. In this sense, taking a home is also a political act. Home is the privilege of the majority or the hegemonically powerful. One group's ability to feel at home comes at the expense of other groups. In case of women, universally due to the institution of marriage and the tradition of patrilocality, they are bound to relocate and migrate from one home to another. This relocation to different physico socio cultural spaces involves forging new spatio existential relations with their marital homes and reorganization of their lives and their identities around a new center of their existence, which is the husband, the legal owner of the new home. This develops homes as essentially the progenitor site of gender politics. Additionally, this role and scope of home as the locus of power negotiation entails what J.L. Austin and later Judith Butler termed as performativity, or simply doing and undoing gender through social discourses. Doris Lessing, in her writings, has explored this latter meaning in its varied dimensions and spread her fictional world across a rich tapestry of domestic, national, and universal spaces, along with all their physical and metaphysical dimensions. Although some sort of division of private and public spheres always pervaded in the construction of genders, since 18th century the bourgeois society of Europe perpetuated such gendered social values like femininity, the home, the family, the private, much more formidably than before. With the emergence of feminist consciousness in 19th century Europe, the questioning of the very separation of the spheres began. Ibsen's Doll's House was among the earliest and most noteworthy attempts to expose this situation. Jean Rhys, in her novel White Sargasso Sea, significantly challenged the ideal of Victorian angelic homely woman as represented in Jane Eyre of Charlotte Bronte. Later, Sandra Gilbert and Susan Goober foreground the real woman against Victorian idealized woman in their famous text, The Mad Woman in the Attic. Besides the literary imaginations, in the real world also, intelligent thinking women like Virginia Woolf in her parental home and Sylvia Plath in her marital home suffer otherliness and eventually descend into madness and consequently choose death over life. In the colonized world of Indian subcontinent, in Rabindranath Tagore's novel Ghare Bahire and R.K. Narayan's The Guide and the Dark Room, question the two spheres of women's existence, but ultimately ends up renegotiating in favor of women's roles within the private sphere. Both the authors attempt to present the women's question vis-a-vis their physical spaces and offer their heroines a chance to foray into the outer world, but eventually plead the case that the proper place of a woman is her home. It is only much later that the idealization of women's roles is given up and a realistic picture is presented. In much celebrated fictional narratives from the agrarian lands of Punjab, in Dilip Kaur Tivana's Eho Hamara Jeevna and Amrita Pritam's Pinjar, the women protagonists suffer at the hands of their own kin in the domestic spheres as an aftermath of political and social situations. The narratives bring the focus closer on the fragility and uncertainty of home spaces for women. Later in Manju Kapoor's The Difficult Daughters, an unconventional, not so good protagonist emerges on the scene. A relationship between women, their home, and outer spaces is explored with detached and incisive realism. The protagonist's vulnerability at the hands of men around and corruption by the society is no longer concealed under any projected idealism. The current paper aims to explore the question of agency of women vis-a-vis the place they call as home with respect to two fictional texts, Doris Lessing's The Grass is Singing and Anita Desai's Cry the Peacock. The two novels, though, are taken from two mutually distant socio-cultural contexts. The Grass is Singing is from Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, and Cry the Peacock from India. They are built around the parallel themes of madness of the female protagonists, the dysfunctional home situations, the culmination of the narrative in death, and the thriving of the raw naturalistic setting. The study attempts to establish the intercultural universality of the problem and seeks to account reasons for the same. The two novels present the problem and consequences of the ideological fostering of isolating women from larger social and political spaces and constricting them into their home spaces by the ideals like marriage, femininity, romance, domesticity, and even motherhood. These social constructions impose severe moral curtailment on these women's participation in civic, political, and public life of their communities, affecting the development of their social consciousness and rendering them blind followers of ideological practices and hegemonic discourses. In Doris Lessing's The Grass is Singing, the story is set in a domestic situation. Central to the story is the Turner family, comprising of Dick Turner and his wife, Mary Turner, both belonging to the white settler community in the African Veld. In addition to them, there is Moses, their black servant, Charlie Slater, a fellow rich farmer, and Tony Marston, a young, idealistic, still uncorrupted apprentice farmer. The bulk of the novel is the story of Mary's life. The story opens with a newspaper report about the murder of Mary Turner by her black servant Moses. The story is narrated from Tony Marston's point of view and is different from the version of the story agreed upon by the white community in the region. The trouble begins in Mary's childhood at her father's house. The expected warmth and security expected from a home is not present at Mary's home. There are sly conjectures at Mary's probable sexual abuse also at the hands of her father. As an adult woman, Mary is repelled by any kind of sexual interest in men. Even as 30 years old woman, she dresses in a young girl's clothing which suggests her unconscious choices of refusal to grow up. She is contented to live a life where she avoids setting up a home in the conventional sense. But ultimately, when she does agree to enter this home situation again through a passionless marriage with Dick Turner under pressure of societal expectations, she carries her frigid lack of interest in the world around and ultimately meets desolation and death. Her mother is dead. Her relationship with her father is almost non existent, so much so that they don't even write letters to each other. Ashamed of her poverty, she is unable to respond to her neighbors and refutes all attempts to assimilate in the white society of the region. Owing to her racist ideology, she is unable to treat the servants in the house with compassion or humaneness. Her lack of social contact with the natives is also part of her general social disability in making interpersonal relationships. She is incompetent in making any human to human bonds and remains isolated, painfully inward looking to the extreme of barren existence, which nurtures the death instinct within her. Also, her death wish is fostered by her lack of association with the natural power of the world. Consequently, Mary lacks the power of not only financial security, love, friendship, and compassion, she also lacks the power of wonderment over the beauty of nature. She is rendered absolutely dependent on Dick. Further, Mary's social isolation also forms a significant reason for her racist behavior, as she loses all opportunity to learn and evolve and is instead static in her own world. She is self centered, she remains isolated in the country life. In this isolation, she is rendered more vulnerable. Also, she loses all opportunity to learn from the experience of others. And in this vulnerable state of mind, she is unable to protect her natural boundaries with Moses. Significantly, the relationship between Mary and Moses is not that of love, rather, it is that of sickness. Moses appears as having absolute power over Mary till Tony Marston comes. In Tony, Mary finds a savior. Moses rejects the loss of power. In this insecure and non nourishing atmosphere of the home, Mary falls victim to Moses' raw natural violence. The physical house is also complicit with nature and its representative Moses in destroying Mary's sanity. The unbearable heat of the house affect Mary the most, while other inhabitants of the house like Dick Turner and Tony Marston are not affected by it to the extent as Mary does. Towards the end, when Moses is about to kill the half mad Mary in the middle of the night, it appears that the trees and the bush have connived in this act with Moses. And finally, with reference to the title of the novel, drawn from T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, when she is killed, the world which was rendered wasteland with the lack of rain for a long spell prospers with the advent of the rain, and the grass sings with joy and mirth of victory. Mary here fails on all fronts of home, homeliness, and homeland. She is the other in all respects. She was doomed to die. Moses was an instrument. The animosity of Mary was with the home and wealth and the world. It was a battle of unequals. She had to fall. In Anita Desai's Cry the Peacock, Maya, a young woman, is trapped in a loveless union like Mary with the emotionally distant and heartless lawyer husband named Gotham. Maya is also raised isolated from human to human bonds. She is raised by her rich father, who inadvertently creates a hopeless romantic of her who suffers from father fixation. She seeks fatherly protection and dependence from her husband too, who most of the time ignores her troubles as immature and childlike attention seeking behavior. This further pushes Maya into her madness. The whole situation is further aggravated by the premonition of an albino priest that there would be a death after marriage. Her acute emotional turmoil, her heightened sensitivity, and a profound sense of loneliness due to lack of warmth and understanding in the domestic situation drives her to insanity. Further, both the women in the two novels yearn for the experience of motherhood. While Mary is rebuffed by Dick due to his poor financial condition, Maya projects her motherly love onto her dog, Toto. Toto's death in the beginning of the novel serves as the ultimate trigger for Maya, but Gotham is unable to understand his wife's emotional bond with the animal. For Gotham, death of Toto can be treated within the analysis and precision of logic and philosophy. In both the novels, the protagonists are good women constrained in their physical spaces in the safety net of their homes owned by their menfolk. While Dick and Gotham have spatiotemporal choices, Mary and Maya have none. Their love, their work, and their social lives are all centered on their husbands. The husbands, on the other hand, oblivious of their needs, fail them on the emotional front, seeking peace and solace in their professional lives. Thus, it can be concluded that while marriage is viewed as a social contract wherein the wife exercises her agency over the home situation, in both these novels, the protagonists suffer from lack of agentive roles in their homes, which lead to their progressive mental degeneration. Both Mary and Maya suffer from acute death wish. While Mary falls prey to deep resignation to her life condition, Maya projects her anguish into anger and takes the charge of actualizing her fate. Thus, she realizes her fate herself by pushing Gotham down the roof of the house. In both the novels, the nature reigns supreme and defeats the constructed situation of home, which is devoid of love and compassion in both the texts. That's all. Thank you.
Ratna is there, no? I think she's muted. Ratna, you're
Yes.
muted.
Not realize that I hadn't unmuted myself. Sorry about that. So I have to thank both my speakers for keeping to the time. I also now spring upon them this very exciting news, which is that these are you, both of you are the only two speakers who will be speaking, because our third speaker has is not able to present. So, which means that we have our schedule really worked out for a longish discussion. So I thought that. I mean, what is it that everybody would like me to do? Would you like me to respond to their papers or just throw this open for questions? Swati, your eye
I'm pretty
clap.
sure right now your remarks are going to be very insightful as always. I would like to congratulate both panelists and give you the floor, and maybe to our participants as well. Thank you.
Okay, so Buthena, I will start with just responding to both the papers. I found them both very interesting, and we now have two new authors and two new narrators from India who are speaking in the same, whose work is being compared with that of Lessing. So that makes it very, very interesting, because this is really the voice of the Deep South that is speaking. So, a very interesting conclusion that I came to, because coincidentally, by a happy coincidence, I happen to have read both Ismat Chugtai. I'm a great fan of Ismat Chugtai's, and I admire Anita Desai immensely. So, Try the Peacock was not only the first novel she wrote, it was also the first novel of hers that I read, because of the chronology of her writing time and my reading time. So my question to Shambhu would be, into room 19, you have this woman who has been through a marriage, who's been very successful, who's had a working life, who's raised children, who runs a beautiful house, but she flees from all of that because she feels that her husband had betrayed her, because she felt somewhere that the magic of their relationship was over, and she takes her to, I mean, it pushes her into this particular room with a particular number in a hotel that she, in a seedy hotel that she is staying in, and she also kills herself. And it's also part of this whole tradition, or this whole narrative where you have women who are breaking down, who are killing themselves. If you have someone like Tolstoy who's talking, then he makes Anna Karenina throw herself before a train, a really violent murder of his character. But of course, she's made to commit suicide in the narrative. And then you have Bovary, who does this with Madame Bovary, for instance. And what is it that Madame Bovary does? She cheats on her husband because she has a notion of a lover. She squanders money that she doesn't earn, and finally she swallows some new chemical product and kills herself. So, I mean, suicide is a very popular legacy that women have into the 20th century. And what troubled me was the fact that in Lihaf, Isma Chukta is not talking about suicide. She's talking about female desire. She's talking about two women, who are having this very ecstatic moment. So, would you not say that somewhere the focus has turned entirely? So we no longer have beaten woman as victim, woman killing herself, woman suffering from low self-esteem, but woman as survivor, woman who's found alternatives. And shouldn't we celebrate this space? I mean, this is one question. This is a question to Shambhu. Ujjwal, my question to you about the two novels that you discussed, Mary and Maya. Of course, you do mention that the geographical locations are very different. But again, that is, of course, very true, and it's very interesting that what really separates Mary and Maya from each other is the use of the R in Mary, and the fact that the R turns into a A in Maya's name, and it's very interesting. Also, from this space of linguistics that you work with, it's a remarkable coincidence. But my question to you again was that in the narrative of Mary and in the narrative of Maya, you have these two men who possibly don't have much in common. In Mary's case, she is chosen by Dick. He sees her, he falls in love with her. Whatever his notion of a woman is, it seems to be fulfilled when he sees her side profile in the theater hall where he's watching, and he pursues her, he woos her, and he marries her. Also, he may or may not. I mean, he's not really enjoying his work. He's not a gentleman of leisure. This is not secondary activity that he's participating in, Dick. But he does feel for her, and when she runs away from home, he goes back to pick her up. So did she when he is very ill. She doesn't push him off the roof, but she sits by him and waits for his fever to break. So, how do we look at these aspects of the relationship that Mary and Dick seem to share? And how do we look at a narrative in which, I mean, I feel this so strongly. Lessing turns Mary into a blood sacrifice, because somewhere the white woman's burden, you know, must be taxed. I mean, white man you can do nothing with. But, Gloria Steinem says that there are going to be lots of wise women who are going to, grey-haired women who are going to take over the world. So I was just thinking that this is really what happens to Mary. On the other hand, you have Maya, who she doesn't come from the socio-economic space that Mary comes from. Very privileged, loses her mother, but she has a father who coddles her. And she has an arranged marriage. She has a marriage, and she's probably one of the very few brides who look forward to husband's relatives visiting. In the history of cultural documentation, you don't find brides like Maya in the Indian context in particular. But then, I mean, she moves from dog to cat, and then finally she turns into a murderess. And not being able to handle that, she kills herself. So what do we do with this conclusion? Because if in The Grass is Singing, Lessing is saying that, these are things that are pushing women to the wall. I mean, Mary is capable of physical violence. She hits Moses. She whips him with a slam jaw. She doesn't move to killing anybody. And Maya is very frightening in terms of this as a choice. So, I mean, I just want to understand where do we see the empowerment in this narrative? Where do we see any kind of redemption? I mean, this is just a question. All right, so thank you for both your presentations, and thank you also for leaving us so much time to have these conversations. And over to both of you and to everyone else at this meeting.
I think Shambhu will take the question first.
Sure.
If Professor Shambhu is not around, then I can speak.
Sure.
Okay, so
I was just thinking if anybody else had any questions or wanted to add to the discussion. I mean, would you like to take their questions also? I mean, I was not really asking.
Sure. That would be really.
I think Ahmed is raising his hand. So,
thank you, Ujjal and Dr. Shambhu, for the presentation. I have one question for Ujjal. Ujjal, you mentioned quite a few texts, quite a few prominent texts, which includes Dolsaus and also Tagore. I just wonder whether you have considered Tagore's Chokher Bali. It was also adapted by Rituparna Ghosh and was made into a successful movie as well. What you find in Ghore Baire, you could, I guess, find a different treatment of, the idea of womanhood in Chokher Bali. For example, it's a question about a widow whose name is Binodini, and she has her friend Ashalata, and what is expected of women in the beginning of the 20th century. But Tagore somehow deconstruct that role of woman or a widow for that matter. For example, this widow Binodini has desires, and she almost acts like a temptress. That is, uh, she would she would try to do, entrap for that matter. That is Mohendro. So it's a kind of a different take of womanhood or widowhood for that matter. So I just wonder whether you have taken into consideration, because that would have definitely taken a new direction, given a new direction what you have tried to talk about. But so your response.
Okay, thank you so much, answer for your question. And first of all, I would like to answer Ratna, Professor Ratna. So, first of all, talking about the marriage, Mary and Dick, and Maya and Gotham. So, in my perspective, I don't know. Maybe in Western societies, arranged marriages do not exist, but the marriage between Mary and Dick was a marriage of convenience. She was also looking for a partner, and he suffered from boredom with his farm.
That's very harsh, Ujjwal. Aren't we all in heterosexual societies where it's compulsory heterosexuality looking for precisely the same thing as men and women?
This is how Lessing projects their marriage. That marriage was a passionless marriage, and even in the film also. In fact, I yesterday watched the film as well. So in the film also, it is projected like this: that marriage between Mary and Dick was a matter of convenience.
Okay.
Then the characters of Dick and Gotham, the similarities, the commonalities between Dick and Gotham. Uh, Dick is a failed farmer, and Gotham is a prosperous lawyer and advocate. So that way, you're right that they do not resemble in their professional success. But Dick, despite being a failed farmer, he has a lot of passionate commitment to his farm work. He enjoys his work and he's committed to his work despite the fact that he is not really a very competent farmer. So the passion which both of these men have for their work, that is similar. Even the day of his death also, Gotham is talking about a professional altercation probably he has in his office. So even at that moment also, when she pushes him down the roof, even at that moment, he's talking about his work. So that is basically the similarity between them. And both of them ignore the emotional needs, particularly of the women in their lives. Regarding the background, here I agree there is a significant difference between both the women. Mary comes from a very humble background, and before her marriage, she is a working woman, whereas the other woman, Maya comes from a very prosperous, well-to-do, wealthy family of Lucknow. Her father actually spoils her during her childhood. But here, the larger situation is similar in the sense that while Mary belongs to a dysfunctional family where her parents are not on good terms with each other, of Maya, her father spoils her so much that he keeps her isolated from the uh, real life, the realism of life. So Maya lives in a romantic world. Her expectations of her husband are again very romantic. As such, I don't think that any of us would really question a husband over his commitment to work so much that you push him down the roof and kill him to this extent. So, but the problem here, it's not entirely with the husbands. The problem is definitely with Maya as well, because Maya is certainly she does not understand the realities of life, the requirements of real life. So all her expectations from her husband are romantic expectations, which probably any husband would over time get tired of. So that way, but her raising by her father in such a way, I find that questionable. In case of Mary is actually severely influenced by the colonial ideology. The colonial ideology of considering the other, the subaltern, as invisible. Mary, despite all her life living amongst the Africans, never notices them. She does not know the African code of conduct. She does not know how to deal with a native servant. She has a repulsion for their naked black bodies, for everything. She treats Moses in the beginning as if he's excrement. So that is the problem. In fact, the central problem to Mary is that she is unable to understand the African situation from the African perspective. In this, we may say that Dick is in a more favorable position. He has a friendly relation with his workers, with all his workers, and he seems to be more humane. In fact, we see this all around us also, in our houses also, in our own farming communities also. While men, they share a comparatively comfortable relationship with the workers on the farm, with the peasants on the farm, the women do not. Women are more prejudiced, women are more strict in executing this kind of apartheid at their homes. So, what could be the reason? I am trying to project that the reason is that women are raised in such a way that they are unable to learn the social code of conduct, which you can only learn when you go out of the house, when you meet people. So, this kind of social isolation leaves them with no other choice but to fall on the book of colonial ideology, let's say in case of Mary. But I mean, any kind of prejudices or any kind of these where they can't be fair and just. They can't be comfortable with in social situations. So the only option, choice left to them is that they fall prey to ideology and internalize the ideology as probably the moral way of behaving. So, women's morality is basically guided by ideologies, while men are more open, more liberal in their approach towards these issues. So that is what. On the other hand, Maya is childish. Maya is immature. There is no doubt about that. Maya does appear and behave immature and childish.
Okay, so we shall uh, accept your reading then that women are more structured and pushed in by ideology than men are, but you forget that very often these structures of ideology are also put down by the people who practice them, whether it's men or women. So, how do we think out of the box? How do we get characters who think out of the box? I mean, this is a question that we all
Uh,
need.
yes, that's in fact a very, I would say, good way, the question that how should we then counter this? So, if you see the Golden Notebook, the ultimate and most popular book of Lessing. In Golden Notebook, Anna Wolf is a woman who has varied experiences outside the home situation. Anna Wolf is hardly a homely woman, and she meets people. She goes to Africa. She has a political identity as well. She so those all the number of roles she plays, the role of a friend, the role of a lover, the role of a mother, the role of let's say a house owner as well, all those number of she works for a magazine, all those roles, they give her a very rich experience of life. And that is when you understand, you see the world from different perspectives. And so you are not bound to look at the world through one
One second, Swati
ideology.
raised her hand. And
Yes.
yes, Swati, are you warning us about something?
You are muted.
The time.
Okay.
I'm the timekeeper, sorry.
So then we move saying that not woman as victim, but woman as exploring possibilities, and keep that as the conclusion of the
Yes.
first leg of today's business.
Just
So
one linelet conclusion that women should move out of their home spaces into the public spaces and look at the world from different perspectives. If they want to break those structured, as you say, those structured, shackled boxes which are given to them by internalization or by imposition, whatever way.
makes sense. Okay, Swati, I hand the podium back to you.
Right, thanks so much. Thanks so much, Ratna, for doing such a marvelous work. And thanks, Ujjwal and Professor Shambhu. I hope he's around or he's listening or he'll come back. We go on to the next session, which is a session which is Buthaina here.
Yes, Swati, I'm here.
Yeah, because Buthaina is going to chair the next session, which is a special session with a very distinguished guest and speaker from China, Professor Wang Hong Cheng, an old friend. I met her a long time back, and I'm so glad we have reconnected, and she's here. She's also there in China at the moment, where there is again another 3-day long Doris Lessing webinar on. Over to Buthaina to do the moderation.
Thank you, Swati. Thank you so much. And thank you, Ratna, for chairing the previous panel. So now we have a special paper, Home and Family in Doris Lessing, by Professor Yan Yun Chen. She's a visiting associate professor in Tsinghua University, former chairperson of the English department in Xin University of Taiwan. She earned her PhD in comparative literature from the University of Washington, Seattle, in the United States. She has taught English and comparative literature in Sun Yat-sen University, Kaohsiung, Xin University, Taipei, University of Washington, and Tsinghua University, Beijing. She was also a Fulbright researcher at the University of Washington from 2007 to 2008. And she served as the secretary of Doris Lessing Society, United States, at the international editor of PNU, Pusan University, National University of Korea, a journal of women's study for many years. Dr. Cheng's publications include Heralds of the Postmodern, Madness and Fiction in Conrad, Wolf and Lessing, published New York, 1999. Parody and Pastiche in the Golden Notebook, published by Doris Lessing Studies in 2008. The Cultural Context of Feminism in Taiwan, PNU Journal of Women's Study in 2009. Madness as Cultural Critique in Modern Fiction, East and West, in Expanding the Frontiers of Comparative Literature, a Return to Transnational Tradition, published in Korea in 2013. And I think that this is a shortened list because there are more publications and more contributions to academia. Today, we're so glad and honored to have her with us. Though there is a parallel conference happened at the same time. So thank you for devoting time to present this special paper entitled Home and Family in Doris Lessing, a Foucauldian approach to Lessing's fiction. To you, Professor Cheng. I don't know, I cannot see her on my screen. I don't know if she's there.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay,
Can you
okay.
hear me?
Yes,
Can you
yes,
hear
yes,
me?
yes,
Okay,
yes.
great. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Mitra, for inviting me to this webinar. And thank you, Professor Major, for your kind introduction. Actually, we are going to have a offline symposium on Doris Lesson here in Hunan, Changsha. So tomorrow, that's tomorrow, it will be a long day from about 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. And there will be about 60, 70 papers on Doris Lessing. So it's great because last time, 4 years ago in 2019, we had the first conference on regional conference on Doris Lessing, and there were about 40 papers. And this time we have more papers and more students and scholars participating in this symposium. So we are very happy and we look forward to our conference tomorrow. So that's why I have present this paper today rather than tomorrow. Okay, so here's my paper. Home and family have been a central setting in women writing's fiction. The traditional associations of the twin with love and security are revised and even subverted in modern and postmodern novels, as the rise of feminism and the drastic changes in social and familiar structures transform the conventional picture of home sweet home, a characteristic middle-class idea of home. Doris Lessing, in many of her works, demystifies such bourgeois patriarchal myths of home and family. Lessing redefines the terms home and family and subverts their conventional founding principle of kinship. Many of her fictional homes and families, such as the shelter and squatters in The Good Terrorist, are composed of people from different families without any blood relations. Moreover, the preconceived ideas of home, motherhood, and well-structured family unit are mocked and satirized in novels like The Summer Before the Dark. The writer sees through the pseudo-moralizing institutionalization of bourgeois family and envisions a far more complex picture of family relations. Ultimately, her new visions of home and family relate to the social, political, and cultural paradigm shifts in the 20th and even the 21st century. In this paper, I would like to study Lessing's revisions of home and family with a Foucauldian approach. Michel Foucault, in some of his works, demonstrates how home has been the site of surveillance and how the family with its demands becomes an essential instrument for the disciplinary society. But for example, sexuality is regulated through family controls, which operates not by simple prohibition, but by complicated power strategies. The so-called reason and morality behind the whole familiar and social structures are questioned by Foucault in terms of power, knowledge, relations, and technologies. Several major novels by Lessing share this point of view. This paper aims at such a Foucauldian interpretation of Lessing's works and explores a theoretical perspective with a different insight into the great author. Home and family have been ideologically loaded words. The traditional family has been clearly the desirable norm even in the modern society. It is this assumption of normality, normal, the noun, and that underlies contemporary perceptions of the traditional family. Yet, this supposedly normal society family is entirely counterfeit because it is flawed at root. Since the Enlightenment, major political thinkers such as Rousseau claimed that the preservation of civil society is grounded on undisturbed passage of property along family lineages. Locke pronounced that the family was the model for civil government. The family provides formative models of social behavior, mutually benevolent relations among parents and children, responsive and responsible authority, evidenced in parental rule, civility in the precious ties among siblings, and so on. In this patriarchal discourse, home and family secure not just individual well being, but social and national order and prosperity. In England, the sense of home gradually turned into the concept of domesticity in the 19th century. And the so called domesticity is founded on the capitalistic ideology that dictates the middle class husband to possess sufficient income and support the family, and his wife to stay home and take care of family members. In other words, the wife serves as the cook, the maid, the nurse, and the housekeeper without being paid. Marriage, in this sense, is more a socio-economic relations rather than of romantic or erotic nature. In addition to their social, historical, and economical connotations, home and family also acquire metaphysical conceptions. Bachelor suggests that home is one of the greatest powers of integration for the thoughts, memories, and dreams of mankind, and thus it helps the ordering of a coherent subjectivity. Even though conceptions and functions of the family have changed, its size, structure, and core responsibilities remain largely stable till now. But its positive qualities are somehow restricted when we consider its effect from a modern feminist point of view. As Rachel Bowlby points out, home is the long tradition of women's writing. In the long tradition of women's writing, becomes a negative term. The home is often than not figured as a prison, the condition of femininity inseparable from women's domestication is artificially imposed by social or and masculine forces at home. If perceived from a contemporary setting, the institution of home and family are likely to be disrupted by the virtual internet invasion, whereby strangers might come closer to home than family members. For Michel Foucault, one of the most influential thinkers in the 20th century, home designates a site of surveillance, and family is an agency of control. The surveillance and control are not to be understood as means of mere oppression, but as part of the Foucauldian technologies of power. According to him, the modern disciplinary society exercises social control over all institutions, such as the family, the school, the hospital, the army, the factory, and so on. The home is designed not just to offer material comforts or to enforce aesthetic taste and moral discipline. It provides the best site for disciplining the individuals into normal citizens. The partitioning of space in the household is directly related to the distribution of the interplays between powers and pleasures. As Foucault keenly observes, quote, the separation of grown-ups and children, the polarity established between the parents' bedroom and that of the children, the relative segregation between boys and girls, the strict instructions as to the care of nursing infants, the attention focused on infantile sexuality, the supposed danger of masturbation, the importance attached to puberty, the method of surveillance suggested to parents, the secrets and fears and the presence of servants, and so on. All this made the family a complicated network, saturated with multiple fragmentary and mobile sexualities, end quote, in his history of sexuality. Furthermore, the disciplinary society regulates individuals from the most fundamental, that is, the body. As the body became the object and target of power, the individual body has been trained and formulated since childhood. At home, the child is raised to behave well, like an adult, a model citizen. Parents and doctors serve as pedagogical guards in the war against child onanism. In addition, the feminine body is considered thoroughly saturated with sexuality. Therefore, it must be integrated into the family space in order to function well as the mother. The mother, however, with her negative image of nervous woman, is often medicalized as a hysterical woman. In school, a student must follow strict rules and activities must be set to a regular timetable and tight schedule. In the army, a soldier is drilled to become a killing machine. As a result, the individual body as the object and target of power is constituted as a part of a multi-segmentary machine. Foucault's view of home and family totally subverts the traditional romanticized notions of home sweet home, and he is not alone in this verdict. Doris Lessing, in some of her later works, even foresee this gloomy picture of home and family. So I'm going to discuss Room 19, which was published quite early in the 1960s, earlier than Foucault's important works such as Discipline and Punish, History of Sexuality, and so on. Doris Lessing questions the traditional conception of home and family in many of her fictions. In her famous short story To Room 19, the foundation of the Rowlands' marriage is intelligence. Intelligence, however, fails Susan when she feels more and more detached from her husband, who has had one affair after another, and disturbed by her own doubts about the so-called home and family. Home is like a cage, quote unquote cage, confining her free spirit, and her family members are monsters, haunting her sense of guilt. Besides, there is a devil in her garden. She knows she cannot expect her husband to understand her fear of madness and feeling of emptiness, but she does not know how to cope with his expectations of her to go foursome in their marriage. She commits suicide when she finds out that her family will survive happily without her. An episode in the story shows an ironic contrast between the social conception of a married woman, Susan, and that of a spinster, Miss Townsend. When Susan goes to a hotel for a temporary break from home, she meets the lonely hotel manager, a spinster of 50, and envious the latter, Miss Townsend, might be. Quote, she said mentally to Miss Townsend, Miss Townsend, my 4 children and my husband are driving me crazy, insane. Do you understand that? Yes, I can see from the gleam of hysteria in your eyes that comes from loneliness, controlled but not just content, that I've got everything in the world you have ever longed for. Well, Miss Townsend, I don't want any of it. You can have it, Miss Townsend. I wish I was absolutely alone in this world, like you. I am besieged by 7 devils, Miss Townsend, end quote. Contrary to Miss Townsend's romanticized fantasy, home and family are the very reason for Susan's madness and suicide. In the story, Susan's beautiful home and the shabby hotels not only form another ironic contrast, but also intimate Susan's mental states. In her house, there are 7 devils driving her crazy, whereas in the hotel, there are anonymous rooms sheltering her soul. The freedom and solitude of anonymity, a nameless personal space where one is free from social conditioning, is what Susan needs most. Despite the fact that at home her family sets a room apart for her by naming it Mother's Room, she finds no sanctuary there. The room 19 in Fred's hotel, where she eventually commits suicide, is more like her home than the one she shares with her husband and children. In 1929, Virginia Woolf, on behalf of all women, asked for a room of one's own. But what kind of a room is it? Is it enough to have a room of one's own at home? Can one escape from the world of hostility and pressure in a room if one's home is the very source of all hostility and pressure? Does she also need a room for meditation or professional work away from home? Lessing seems to have a different answer to hidden on a response to Woolf's humble wish. She questions the conditioning of the room at home and the effect of an alternative home. In the summer before the dock, Kate, a middle-class housewife, suddenly wakes up from the 20 years of marriage life, awakening to the truth that nobody in her family needs her anymore. She feels like an abandoned cat or a wounded seal that needs to be rescued and cared for. During the long summer vacation, where everyone else in the family goes abroad for various purposes, she finds herself homeless. Since her house is being rented out, she moves from one city to another, from one hotel to another, reflecting on herself and probing for a new identity. The patriarchal idea of motherhood, the central ground for the traditional conception of home and family, is constantly mocked in this novel. When Kate takes a temporary job as an interpreter of an United Nations global conference, she is mostly valued in a mothering role, taking care of everyone and everything. Even when she goes to Spain for vacation with a younger lover, she still plays the same role in caring for her sick lover. Finally, when she rents a room from Maureen, who eventually becomes very close, like a daughter to her, she can hardly escape from the usual function of mothering a young woman. Old habits die hard. Even though Kate gradually comes to realize the confining role of motherhood, she cannot help falling into in her concern and care for others. Kate's old habit results from the internalization of the patriarchal conception of motherhood. The internalization of the patriarchal idea of motherhood in Kate has been so deeply rooted that she can barely break away from it. Lessing is not only interrogating conventions as a stifling system, but also more specifically questioning the functions of home and family as disciplining and normalizing individuals, especially women. When Kate and her neighbor Mary talk about their kids in school, in their cow sessions, so-called cow sessions, they cannot help laughing at the jargons used by school authorities, such as stress situation, parent and child confrontation, well-structured family unit, and so on. Soon they were shrieking at the words such as family and home and mother and father. What makes them laugh is the absurd imposition of meaning and values upon those terms, which for the two mothers are empty words, since the real situation in their homes and families are far more complicated and disappointing than the normal bourgeois family that other imagines in the society and the society expects. Familial problems such as aging, emotional drain, sexual dissatisfaction, extramarital affairs, conflicts between parents and children, and middle-aged mothers' feeling of loss and emptiness, as illustrated in this novel, are often misunderstood and concealed from the public eyes. Kate becomes almost mad, but eventually overcomes this sense of despair and returns home after discovering a new self. Next, I'll discuss The Good Terrorist. Presenting several variations of the same theme, Lessing has redefined the term home and family by subverting the disciplinary power of home and family. In The Good Terrorist, for example, the setting is a shelter where homeless young squatters live illegally together and eventually organize a Marxist group. Coming from a high middle class family, but feeling alienated from her family, selfless devotion to her comrades, all the domestic bliss she creates for them is ridiculed as, quote, all a lot of shit. In other words, bourgeois nonsense. Even when she sits alone and enjoys a moment of peace and quiet, she feels guilty because it is selfish and totally petite bourgeois to demand privacy as her mother used to do. These conflicting ideas result in Alice's self-contradiction, which derives from both her blind submission to ideological higher powers and her betrayal of her true self. This group of homeless squatters, however, acts more like a family to each other than their own blood relations, who have disowned them or been disowned by them. The desire for a sense of belonging transforms Alice from a kind and resourceful woman to a good terrorist who engages in violent protest against the capitalistic bureaucratic government. Their shelter, nevertheless, is no home sweet home, for the conflicts among the occupants are even more complicated than those among the family members, as their naive ideas of revolution have been manipulated by much more sophisticated and professional political camps. The incongruity between their good intention to fight against the capitalistic injustice and the evil outcome of their bombing, hurting many people, innocent people, between their lack of experience in violent action and their vague grand political ideals, makes these terrorists more pitiful than terrifying. The interplays between power and knowledge are ridiculed as something like children's acting in their play. The group finally falls apart because everyone has different emotional and ideological burdens, which lead him or her to a different plan for the future. The ultimate irony of this terror story is that the fracturing of Alice's actual family is repeated within the terror cell commune, her created family. In conclusion, we may interpret lesson anew from a Foucauldian approach and gain a new insight into the great author. The key operational ideas of the Foucauldian power knowledge theory are internalization and normalization. That is, all the power knowledge interconnections are linked and organized through the individual's internalization of the systems and the normalization of the whole society. Put in another word, the process of individual internalization of power knowledge relation constitutes the normalization of everyone through vigorous training and examination, and consequently the formation of a disciplinary society. Finally, the disciplined, normalized individual becomes an object, a case, a series of numbers via registration and documentation. And his or her body is drilled and transformed into a machine, running as a small part of the social disciplinary machinery. Lesson's fictions portray an intimate history of how the supposedly free and competent individuals have been confined and disciplined by their homes and families, how their bodies have been violated, their personalities distorted, and their aspirations thwarted. In addition, the homes and families in her novels represent the changing social and political paradigms of the 20th and the 21st century. Home and family have to be redefined and their functions reconsidered. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this very insightful presentation. You made me think of a quote by Salman Rushdie, who says, when a woman becomes a mother, she becomes a loser. So it's true. Somehow we have to bargain now with time, with everything. Thank you for shedding light on how family flow in roots and giving this critique of modern society, referring to Room 19 and The Summer Before the Dark. But I'm pretty sure, and I noticed that you have extensively written about Lessing, that there are other works, and almost in all her works, she questions social systems and institutions. She hates marriage. She says it's not one of my talents. And she left school at the age of 14 because she thought that it washes people, means that the good education for her is a good library. So you made me think of prisons we choose to live inside.
Yes, exactly. I'm going to talk about that in another paper, which I'm going to present tomorrow.
Yeah, but I think her feminine texts are not feminists, and she hates being labeled as
Yes.
feminist. They rather aim to address the human and to put us face to face with our reality, with the systems we've crafted for ourselves. So thank you so much, Professor Shing. It's the first time we meet virtually. Hope to see you in person very, very soon. Thank you. Thank you so much. And congrats on your chapter and for the conference tomorrow.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing all of you in person in the future.
Hopefully. Or in Tunisia or in India. I think that we've opened the borders now with these chapters. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Swati, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank her because it was such a brilliant paper, and Professor Cheng, I have actually gone through both your books, which I found. So they were the ones which I was using during my PhD days. So
Oh,
yes, thank you so much again for enlightening us. Thank you so much. Yeah,
Thank you, Swati.
I
I
think
think
yeah, we
we
have
have,
a second session now.
yes, business session two, young scholars making more of Lessing, chaired by Dr. Sajis Vapala, Department of English from India. So to you, Professor. Swati.
Yeah, I was waiting for Sajesh to join. He was supposed to do the chairing. I think he will be here in a. He said he'll be here. Could you just give me or and all the oh my god. Yeah.
Yes,
Looks
maybe this happens in online presentations, but maybe if I say a few words about those great keynote lectures that we had. This is a mother, the phone rings every now and then. This is exactly what Lessing hates about this institution. I would like to thank Professor Hanin and Professor Sheng for these two great lectures. Home took another dimension. When I heard you talking about homes, both the body and the text, but also home as an institution, they become an extension of our own reality. Swati, shall we
yes.
move to the
Yes,
business?
we will just move on to the next business session, which has all the young scholars, and they have
Yes,
already joined in. So we just go according. We I
to
think
this.
you and I we do it together since Sajish is not here, so
Okay.
no problem there. We have the first person who is there is Pahuldeep Kaur, who is a research scholar at Guru Nanak Dev University. I went through her abstract and the bio note, and I know she is many time a gold medalist and is looking forward to gaining even greater grounds. She's so it is Pahuldeep now. Pahuldeep is here. Um,
Yes, ma'am, I'm here. Am I audible?
yes, you're audible. You could also be visible if you don't. If you, it's not a problem. We would love to see.
Yes. Okay, ma'am.
I think that would be very nice. We'll switch up. Thank
Am
you,
I
Pahul.
visible?
You're visible, audible, and way to go. All the best.
Thank you, ma'am. My name is Pahuldeep Kaur, and I'm a PhD scholar. Right now, I'm pursuing my PhD under the guidance of Dr. Ujjaljeet. And the title of my paper is A Comparative Study of Women in Context to Their Attachment with Their Home. The aim of this paper is to study the concept of home as related to gender. The theme of the quest for home will be studied by comparing and contrasting two stories, namely Taboo by Victor Astafiev and The Old Woman and Her Cat by Doris Lessing. In order to study the theme of the quest for home, as far as the female is concerned, the novel Pinjar by Amrita Preetham would be used. The technique that will be used to study these works will be the technique of comparison. It would shed light on the differences and the similarities between both stories and the novel. This paper aims to bring to notice the theme of home in all three of these works. Does the quest for home ever finish, or is it a continuous process, an everlasting pain? By exploring this question, it could be pointed out whether a woman is in the world or of the world. I would like to summarize these three works shortly. The story The Old Woman and Her Cat is a story about a woman named Hetty. She belongs to a gypsy background and is ridiculed by her husband at home. After he dies, she is forsaken by her children, for she gets in touch with her gypsy roots. Her children break all ties with her because she embarrassed them due to her ancestry and her way of life. She accepts the fact that she is unwanted by her children and gets attached to a stray cat whom she named Tibby. She felt a kind of solidarity with the cat. She felt that Tibby was the only source of happiness in her aloof life. She was told by the authorities that she would be provided with better housing on the condition that she leaves the cat behind. She did leave Tibby to move on to the new location, but then she took the cat and quietly left the place. She lived her life like a vagabond, and her appearance was quite amusing with her cat. In her body was found days after, as far as Tibby was concerned, giving affection and wouldn't have been adopted by anyone. As far as the story Taboo is concerned, it is written by Victor Astafiev, a Russian writer. It is a story about a woman named Udarka who has been told by her family that she is not supposed to have a cherry for 8 years when someone died in the family. But the problem is that she is constantly reminded of the tragedies and the deaths in her family by the very presence of the cherry tree in her house, which was planted by her and her grandfather when she was a child. The tree had grown so big that it had blocked the light coming inside her house. Odarka has also grown along with the cherry tree. She even reaches her old age, but she is not able to taste a single cherry, as the process of death in her family is a continuous one. One death takes place after the other. Odarka has lost several of her family members from 5 generations that she has witnessed, either from disease or because of war. Finally, when she loses her grandson named Petru, she eats the cherries for the first time in her life, which she is given by a soldier who came for relief in her house. She finds the cherries very bitter and she tries to spit them out. She also tells the soldier to cut down the cherry tree as she feels that it is a source of all her sorrows and its end would bring about the end to all the sorrows in her life. When the tree is cut, finally, all the light which had been blocked by it enters the house. In the morning, when Udarka is about to throw away the cherry seeds, she finds it hard to do so, and in spite of all the sorrows that were symbolized by the cherry tree, she decided to sow the seeds and grow them again, wishing that it sees a fate better than its ancestor tree. The theme of continuity of life and death runs throughout the story. The novel Pinjar is written by a Punjabi author named Amrita Preetham. It is a novel which has been set at the time of the partition of India. It shows how the protagonist Puru is kidnapped due to an old animosity of the family. She is a Hindu woman, and her captor is a Muslim man named Rashid. After being kidnapped, she tries to escape, and one night she is able to go back to her parents' house. Her parents refuse to have her back, as she had brought shame to the family, and the other sisters would face problem finding suitable grooms if they accepted her. She is made to leave. She then gets married to her captor and bears his child. During the partition of India and Pakistan, she learns that her sister in law, Laju, who was married to her brother, is kidnapped by a Muslim man who is keeping her against her wishes. Puro, along with her husband Rashid, not only saves Laju, but they also send her back to India to her family. I would like to analyze the female characters in all these works with their relationship to home. Home is supposed to be a fixed place which should enable the occupants to feel secure. It also symbolizes the warmth and love one feels for the family. According to the traditional gender rules, women have to remain inside the boundary of the home to be respected. Women are culturally programmed to stay inside the boundary. Home itself becomes a place where the gender theory is practiced. In the story Taboo, the character of Udarka stays at home while her male family members leave home one by one in order to fight wars. And those who don't die in the wars are getting killed by infectious diseases. It is not like the female members of the family did not die. Some of them did die at the hands of various diseases, but the death of the male members has been stressed more than the death of the female members. Udarka, in her old age, has a home and a roof on her head, but she does not really have the comfort and security that a home is supposed to provide. In the story, the old woman and her cat, Hetty, was respected when her husband was alive and she had a roof over her head. But after the death of her husband, she embraced her life as a person moving from one place to the next place. which made her lose respect in the eyes of people around her to such an extent that they maintained their distance from her. Even her own children had forsaken her, and they did not want to have any kind of association with her. The thing to be noted is that the origin of her disrespect at the hands of other people started after the death of her husband, when she did have a home to live in, even though it was much less as compared to the one her husband had provided for her. The respect is lost after the loss of the only man in her life. She lost the support of society the moment she lost the hand of a man from her head and started to fend for her survival on the street, which is supposed to be the arena of the males. Hetty, unlike Odarka, is not attached to a fixed home. Maybe this is the reason why it is easier for her to practice individuality. Home, under this logic, is a patriarchal construct. She is not attached to any kind of responsibility, and she is not answerable to anyone for her behavior, since her children have broken all ties with her. Odarka, on the other hand, stays at home, and she is tied to the dead of her family. Hence, she cannot practice any kind of individualism. A fixed home further pushes the gender roles and imprisons the woman. Odarka and Hetty are different because Hetty steps outside the boundary of her home and is disrespected. Odarka never crossed the boundary of her home, but her home was never able to provide her with warmth and security. On the contrary, home for Odarka becomes a place with no light and no hope. In the novel Pinjar, there are three female characters who become prey at the hands of male predators when they are outside the boundary of their home. The protagonist Puro is safe when she stays inside her father's home. She was kidnapped by Rashid when she stepped outside her boundary. Rashid, after kidnapping her, kept her locked up in his house. One day she escaped to her parents' home. Her parents refused to keep her. They even said that she should have died the day she was born. She had no choice other than to accept her captor as her husband. Her father's home was a safe place for Puro when she felt protected. She was under the protection of a patriarch there, her father. When she stepped outside, she is unprotected and she is kidnapped by a man who then keeps her locked up in his house. In this case, home is reduced to a cage where a woman is made a prisoner. The English translation of the title Pinjar is a cage. Puro's sister-in-law Lajo is kidnapped when she is outside the security of her father's home and is trying to cross the border in order to reach the Indian side during the partition. Her father's home meant security for her, social as well as sexual. After being kidnapped, she is kept in the house without her consent by her captor. In this case, again, home is decreased to a cage and a woman is reduced to a prisoner. There is also a character of a mentally abnormal homeless woman named Jaldi, which means mad in English. She is without a family, she is unkempt, and she roams around Puro's village all day. With time, people realize that she is pregnant. Without a home, a woman becomes soft target for sexual predators. I would like to discuss the theme of attachment in all these three works. Since women in both the stories are alone in their old age, they are attached to certain things or beings for survival. Hetty is attached to the cat, whom she named Tibby. She is dependent on Tibby for her existence, and Tibby brought a dead pigeon for her when she had no money and was a source of survival for her. Hetty adopted Tibby because she felt that Tibby was unkempt and unwanted, just like she herself is. Odarka feels that the cherry tree is the source of her sorrows, as it is a constant reminder of the dead people in her family. She wanted to get rid of it. This is the reason why, towards the end of the story, she tells the soldier to cut the tree down, saying, "Cut down the sorrow." The thing is that she is deeply attached to the cherry tree because it's a part of her collective identity associated with the community through custom, but just like Hetty, is not able to let go of the cat Tibby, even at the cost of losing the opportunity to get a proper housing facility. Odarka could not let go of the cherry tree, even after getting rid of the tree. When the soldiers chopped off the tree, for the first time in decades, Udarka's house received light. Yet she is not ready to let go of the custom. She decided to sow the seeds of the cherry tree once again as she was just about to throw them. Hetty is united with her cat Tibby in her sorrow, in the same way Udarka is a witness to the sorrows in her life, just like the cherry tree planted there. Also, the cat and Hetty both are dynamic in nature. They move from one place to another constantly, in the same way Odarka is static, just like the thing she is associated with, that is, the cherry tree. Puro, on the other hand, she gets attached to her child, which makes her life easy to live. Lastly, I would like to make a comparison of The Old Woman and Her Cat and the novel Pinjar with a movie named Miss 45, showcasing the theme of women in connection with home. The story, The Old Woman and Her Cat, and the novella Pinjar can be compared to a movie named Miss 45. The protagonist of the movie is a young, mute seamstress living in an apartment without her family. She had a simple routine of going to work and then coming back home. One day, when she came back home from work, she saw that there was a robber in her apartment trying to steal things. When the robber finds out that she cannot speak, he sexually assaults her. In this case, a home becomes an unsafe place where a woman is least expected to be unsafe. A female's quest for home, in reality, is not a place with walls and roof. In the case of Adarka and the young seamstress, having a home does not mean social security. In conclusion, I would like to say that in all the works discussed above, it is seen that the quest for home is never ending for a woman. If she is homeless, she has to move from one place to another to find a safe place. And when she has a home, she is caged in an endless cycle of grief. The quest for home is never ending because women live in a world ruled by patriarchy. If Odarka is plagued by war and disease, Hetty faces the loveless behavior of her children after the death of her husband. While he was alive, her life was secure, and even though she was ridiculed by her husband, she was not unwanted. Puro and Laju, they both are unsafe outside the boundary of their homes, but inside the boundary of the homes of their captors, they are no more than prisoners. These stories prove that women might live in the world, but they are still not of it because they don't truly belong to the world as it is ruled by patriarchy. Thank you so much for making me a part of this seminar. Thank you so much.
Congratulations, Pauldeep. Excellent paper. So now we give the floor to Samiksha Singh, if I'm pronouncing it right, who is a PhD research scholar in the Department of English and Modern European Languages at the University of Allahabad. Her research area is women writers' autobiographies. She has completed her graduation from University of Allahabad. She has completed her post graduation from the Department of English and Modern European Languages, the same university. She topped in her post graduation and has received 7 gold medals. Wow. She has few research papers published. She has an interest in women's writings, biographies, and autobiographies. Her inspiration comes from the works of famous women writers such as Simone de Beauvoir, Kamala Das, Bell Hooks, and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. She's dedicated to work for women empowerment and extensively writes about women. A literature enthusiast, she's eager to learn and explore new areas, and we're so excited to listen to her paper entitled The Concept of Indefinite Home through the select works of Doris Lessing and Kamala Das. To you, Samiksha. You there?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the warm introduction. Good evening, everyone. Firstly, I would like to express my gratitude to the organizers, the coordinators, and the respective speakers for making me a part of this conference. I'm very happy to be a part of this conference. And today, I'm going to present a paper on the topic the concept of indefinite or definite homes in the select work of Doris Lessing and Kamala Das. My research area, as you all know, is women writers' autobiography, and Doris Lessing is one of my major authors. So it's a pleasure to present a paper on her. Traditionally, a home represents a place where one's ancestors used to live or the place of one's origin. But more recently, in contemporary times, literature has defined homes in various ways. Home can now be construed as an idea, a social construct, or a story told by oneself about one's own origin. In memory studies, also, it is said that home is never fixed, and this is clearly evident through the writings of Doris Lessing. This paper shall attempt to shed light on the settler culture where home for women lacked freedom. In other words, it is a site of colonial subjugation, and the paper shall further explore the unexplored territories of female psyche, which breaks the shackles of patriarchy and searches for a permanent space through the works of Doris Lessing and Kamala Das. Doris Lessing finds her first home in southern Rhodesia as her only home, as the researcher Victoria Rosiner in her article Home Fires, Doris Lessing, Colonial Architecture and the Reproduction of Mothering records that after settling in southern Rhodesia, Lessing never really felt settled down, even though she changed so many homes. To quote Lessing herself in her memoir, Going Home, she says that I don't live anywhere. I have never, since I left the first house at Copy. Though a settler, yet Lessing developed a special attachment for her first house and the bush. Southern Rhodesian culture constructs the home as a woman's sphere. The female settler is described in relation to the house, and that house was recognized with the female body. Lessing strongly believed that the building or any kind of living space has always an impact on the people who live there. Home is not just a physical accommodation, but also a place where one can feel loved and can express himself or herself freely. Home was seen as the main domain of a woman. Similar to her mother, Lessing also developed the understanding of the house being her own body, referring it as her other skin. The oneness with the house made her feel she is aware of the geography of the world like the lines on her palm. This identification is formed on a maternal basis. In other words, whenever Lessing sees herself as bodily linked to the house, she also imagines herself as a mother. The house represents a maternal space for the women to grow. Family and home are major themes in Lessing's works. Lessing tries to reconstruct and redefine the term home in her later writings. She explores how home is not always a place of safety and familiarity, but necessarily within it includes the differences, the resistances, and the dependencies that cannot be ignored. In contrast to her mother, Lessing cannot treat the bush and the house as the two utterly distinct spheres and dreams about the destruction of her own house. This dream is pictured in her autobiography, Under My Skin, where she notes the house I had been brought up in was crumbling in my sleep, demolished by white ants and borers, the thatch sliding off the old rafters to lie in dirty heaps on earth, blackened by a recent bushfire. Dreams have always been my friend. The settler culture kept women in or around the house, and the bush was seen as a threat to women. The bush was actually picturized as a place where white women may get raped. The reason as to why Lessing visualized the demolishment of her home was that she wished to escape in the bush. As for her, it was indicative of freedom and a way to overcome gender constraints. It is implied through Lessing's writings that her childhood home is also a representation of colonial subjugation, a place where women are trapped inside the buildings and their freedom is curbed. The house also marked the racial boundaries between the whites and the blacks. Lessing suggested that a relatively groundless fear of rape and a risk to health was the basis of keeping white women away from the bush. Boys and girls played separately. The boys, as Lessing recalls, went outside shooting with air guns, and the girls were always playing in the house. But Lessing subverts this conventional setup. As she states in her autobiography, Under My Skin, to quote, "When I was alone with my brother, we went together into the bush." Unquote. Escaping in the bush was a way of transcending the patriarchal boundaries because white women and girls were prohibited in the bush. Her transgressive gesture was also a way of opposition, a mental conflict for creation of a self space, a space away from her parents or any other kind of authority, a space where she can be her real self and she can redefine herself in her own possible ways. Doris Lessing's wandering in the bush also represents her rebellion against her mother and all those women who surrendered themselves to patriarchy and were stuck in their respective homes. Here, home becomes a site of patriarchal imprisonment for them, curbing their free moments of both the women's body as well as their minds. Lessing desired independence from societal norms which were imposed upon her by her own mother. Her struggles began at the very onset of puberty itself, as she depicted in her autobiography when she says, "My 14th was a make or break year, a sink or swim year, a do or die year, for I was fighting for my life against my mother." For Lessing, the concept of home is always bound up with its other, exile. Susan Watkins, in her article Remembering Home, Nation and Identity in the Recent Writings of Doris Lessing, notes that Doris Lessing, in The Sweetest Dream, spends much of her time attacking the homes, or to say, the safe houses, people find in utopian idealism in various forms. The protagonist of the novel, The Sweetest Dream, Frances Lennox, spends much of her time cooking and caring for her extended family. Many of the important scenes of the novel involve lengthy discussions about where different people will sleep and other forms of on the preparations, the servings, and eating of huge meals around the kitchen table. She ironically she ironically mocks the middle class idea of home, where a woman is supposed to do the cooking and the dishes and everything of the mundane works. She ironically mocks it, and then the novel implies that the family is certainly not about genetic or blood ties, neither it is about the economic ties that operate through the exchange of women in marriage. Instead, family is a loose agglomeration of people who are connected emotionally in a variety of ways. Similar to Lessing, the multilingual South Asian women writers explored the gendered situation where home is the central problem. Kamala Das is one such defiant writer who subverts the notion of patriarchy through her works. Kamala Das's poetry begins in pain and anguish caused by the loss of her freedom to live her life the way she liked to. She opposes to settle in a male dominated world and tried to reshape her own world where she can be free from all kinds of gendered constraints. Thus, in her autobiography, My Story attacked the patriarchal setup where women were supposed to get married at an early age, to do the perform the mundane works of daily life, to bear children, and men were supposed to earn and to dominate. Thus, herself was a victim of such a marriage. Somehow, she managed to break the trap of domesticity through the power of her pen. Attacking the institution of marriage, in her autobiography, My Story, she records, "My mother did not fall in love with my father. They were dissimilar and horribly mismatched. But my mother's timidity helped to create an illusion of harmony which satisfied the relatives and friends." The author delineates the superficial standards of society, and she describes it to say in her own words in the autobiography My Story, to quote, "Marriage meant nothing more than a show of wealth to families like ours. It was enough to proclaim to the friends that the father had spent half a lakh on its preparations. The bride was unimportant. and her happiness was a minor issue. Women writers were treated as chattel by men and were trained to be perfect housewives. They were expected to be a wife, a cook, an embroiderer, or maybe a quarreler with the servants. Kamala Das mocks this idea in her poem An Introduction, where she says, dress in sari, be girl, be wife, they said, be embroiderer, be cook, be a quarrel with servants, fit in, oh, belong, cried the categorizers. Don't sit on wall or peep in through our lace-draped windows. Be Amy or be Kamala or better be still Madhavi Kutti. These names are not just names, but they signify a kind of role. Every name is attached to a particular set of characters which the women are assigned. They have to follow those traits. If she is to be Amy, she has to be in a certain way. If she is Kamala, then she has to be in another way. And if she is Madhavi Kutti, then in another way. So the names are assigned some gendered roles against which Kamala Das has written in her several poems. K. Sachidanandan, in his introduction to the author and autobiography titled Relocating My Story, notes that gradually Kamala Das overcame her self pity, decided to yield to the man's carnal hungers, and to be a typical middle class housewife, a child bearer, vegetable monger, garment washer, hanging her husband's underwear with pride to dry in the balcony like some kind of a national flag. But the fiercely independent and creative that she was, no decision could even reduce her disgrace and discomfort that defined the rest of her life, which, on the one hand, was abundantly fertile with her stories and poems, and on the other hand, unbearably desperate with her endless search for love. Kamala Das used her writing as a weapon, and she called her personality as the raw material. She gracefully subverted the convention of kinship. She proved how roles were authorized gender by the guardians of morality and how women can transcend these gender roles and search for their identity. A major fact that hinders women's expression of thought is the lack of privacy, of sheer physical space to reflect and to work in. In 1929, Virginia Woolf, in her famous essay, A Room of One's Own, claims that a woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction. A woman's sphere is always defined in relation to her family, her home, her society. It never speaks about the woman as an individual. Marriage is also a reason due to which women feel homeless, and the question of belonging comes into the play. Parents treat women as guests after the marriage, and their in laws are never able to take them as their own family. A sense of dislocation grows in them, and it forces them to feel like a migrant under their own roof. Therefore, women in particular have created homes for their imagination, hope, and freedom. To conclude, the discovery of an intimate physical space is a step towards non-conformity against the prevailing rules of society and exploration of one's own identity. Like Lessing, South Asian women writers express how women lives are ultimately a quest as they negotiate a space for women by bridging the gap between the definite or utopian home and the indefinite or dystopian home. Thank you so much.
Okay, Samika, that was very nice. Um, I think it was very pertinent because this is what we are trying to do, uh, bring in a comparative look, and because Lessing is so very pertinent even to our culture. Uh, so I think that is something you've done so wonderfully. And very honestly, when I read Kamala Das before and I read Lessing after, and then I read Kamala Das again, especially the autobiography. and there have been a lot of times when they have spoke to each other, as it were. So I'm so glad you brought it all out together. So, and you more or less be kind of maintain time. So that is very nice, given you all are very young and scholars and doing it at a very early stage in your life. So all the best. We'll take questions maybe after the sessions are through. We'll go on to Tanmay Bhattacharjee, if I am getting it right, I hope. Tanmay is here, has been, and his paper is very interestingly titled. It's called A Sycamore Tree Screened the Gaping Window, Hope as Traveling Memory in Doris Lessing Stories. Tanmay Bhattacharjee is a PhD research scholar in the Department of English, West Bengal State University. Sarojini Naidu collected poems, Sufi and Bhakti influence. A broad overview is his first book, authored in 2016, commemorating the 50th anniversary of the first UN Conference on Environment. He has of late brought out a critical edition of its own kind on the multidisciplinary facets of ecology and literature, entitled Understanding Environment, an anthology of critical essays. So, looking forward to your paper, Tanmay. Please go for it.
Yes, ma'am. Am I audible and
Yes, you're
visible as
audible.
well?
Yes, yes, both.
So, thank you for allowing me to present my paper in such an august gathering with scholars such as my teachers. I'm so happy to be here. So, um, as the title tells you, I would like to say that, I have kind of tried to see Lessing's story to Room 19 from the point of view of contemporary memory studies. So, I begin. In the book Futures Past, on the semantics of historical time, the noted German historian Reinhard Koselleck has identified the past as a space of experience and the future as a horizon of expectation in order to categorize how the indices of past, present, and future look and how they differ from one another. The horizon of expectation accommodates even the most oppositional feelings, hopes, fears, dreams, and nightmares. Whereas the space of experience includes both positive and negative aspects of the past. The past as a space of experience is inalienably bound up with identity and imagination. And in a very crucial sense, as Julie Hansen shows in her article Theories of Memory and the Imaginative Force of Fiction, any work of fiction ultimately helps us understand the past and define our relation to it. Our relation to it, I mean our relation to the past, is never an easy subject. And quite interestingly, iconoclast writers like Doris Lessing have directly questioned the so called watertightness of what we acknowledge as past. In the multi volume work La Lieu des Mémoires, French historian Pierre Nora has already established the very rudimentary link between place, which is lieu, and memory, which is memoir. The connection between place and memory has also figured as a trope in Lessing's story to Room 19, and the story's speciality lies in the way it seeks to dissociate place from memory. For this particular story of Lessing, and of course for many more, home is both a place and a memory. We shall see how the gaping window of Lessing's An Old Woman and Her Cat has recurred here as a symbol for a deeply compromised self esteem, crying agonizingly for a shield by any damn thing, even by a roadside sycamore tree. Just as Joyce's Kunstlers Roman, a portrait, shows the workings of an artist's mind, Lessing's Two Room 19 examines the evolving curvatures of a nuptial, of course, with no promise for a teleological ending. Memory, place, love, and marriage make such a curious blending in the life of the Rawlings, a dreaming couple, that they, with their intelligent decision for marriage, soon get canonized as an epitome for intelligent conjugality. The popular young married couple, Susan and Matthew, become the talk of the town for, I quote, everything right, appropriate, and for making the balanced and sensible family because of their infallible sense of choosing right, I unquote. They were both successfully employed, Susan and Matthew, before their marriage. But as they became parents, a son first, then a daughter, then twins, son and daughter, their life took a turn, especially Susan's. Matthew continued as usual, but Susan, a promising employee in an advertising firm, had to quit it for practical intelligence. For the sake of Matthew, the children, the house, the garden, which unit would have collapsed in a week without her. The whole world knew and commended them as the most sensible couple. And naturally, when at the end of each day they met as very sensible couple in the big married bed, in the big married bedroom, they behaved as if everything was all right, everything was in order, things were under control. Susan's qualities of humor, balance, and sense were of great value for the firm she served, but she willfully desisted herself from rejoining it for the sake of her independence. After all, they were the most sensible, and being the most sensible, they, I quote, sensibly blamed neither themselves nor each other. Although there definitely were the hidden resentments, the deprivations of the woman who has lived her own life and above all has earned her own living and is now dependent on a husband for outside interests and money. Lessing, however, wanted them to carry on with their marital innings, just as any other ordinary couple would do once they were on the boat of marriage, a small boat full of helpless people in a very stormy sea. It all meant that the institution that marriage eventually was like a boat in a sea, and trials and tribulations could jolly well come its way. Susan could sometimes feel a bit sagged out, but then this was nothing unnatural. They were schooled in 100 theories, 100 books, psychological, anthropological, sociological, and they knew, or rather they forced themselves to believe, that the dry, controlled wistfulness is the distinguishing mark of the intelligent marriage. The quality of humor, balance, and sense that accorded Susan a reputable place in her firm was falling short of the durability required for fighting the inner storms and quicksands of life. Life for Susan was turning banal and only more banal. Dullness and drudgery were casting their lengthening shadows, but then Susan drew her solace from the platitude that this was life, that two people, no matter how carefully chosen, could not be everything to each other. By the span of these undulating 12 years of their marital life, they were more or less inured to the fact that they could not be everything to each other. But there seldom grew in Susan the feeling that, as if the essential Susan were in abeyance. Such a nasty feeling, however, brewed as soon as one night Matthew declared of having slept with another girl in some late night revelry. The moment Susan felt that she was somehow cheated and betrayed, the edifice which supported their intelligent love began to collapse. Susan felt that the life had turned a desert and the children were by no means her own children. She neither quarreled nor shed tears. They were intelligent after all, and intelligence, I quote, barred quarreling, sulking, anger, silences of withdrawal, accusations, and tears. Intelligence forbids tears, I unquote. The breach of trust being exposed, Susan began to think more of herself than anyone else, pretty unself consciously. Hard work was not so much daunting for her as the boredom that she often suffered out of caring and tending the little children. She couldn't, of course, motivate herself to go about her chores had she not surreptitiously hoped that in another decade she would turn herself back into being a woman with a life of her own. Sorry. Just this one hope sustained Susan. For just this one slender hope, she was ready to pay any price which was required to be paid for the happy marriage with the four healthy children in the large white gardened house. The present was all bleak to her. The nuptials turned out to be just a civilized affair in a civilized bedroom. Only a civilized laughter was left to comfort them, to save them from something whose identity they didn't really know. I quote, when they lay side by side or breast to breast in the big civilized bedroom overlooking the wild solid river, they laughed, often for no particular reasons. The laugh comforted them. It saved them both, though from what they didn't know. Almost each single night during bedtime, in each other's arms, they discussed various things, most of them being very banal and commonplace. One such most commonplace point was Susan's blossoming from the root of what she had been 20 years before. According to Matthew, the essential Shushan was for the time being screened. It was as if the essential Shushan were in cold storage. Matthew's words were mollifying, no doubt, but to Shushan, they were completely unreliable. Hence, whatever Matthew said to glorify Shushan's present life and her hugely intelligent sacrifice of the past was reduced to use Veret Vinitsky Sereusi's words, now who is the professor of sociology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. I'm using her words, the bottom-up panel commemoration, which concerns the various convoluted, often curious ways in which past events and people are recollected. Hardly intended as such, these kinds of reminiscences and referencing nonetheless do become mnemonic practices and thus also require our attention. Truly enough, Shushan began to reminisce the past events and people in various convoluted and curious ways. And all what she could think of herself boiled down to one distinct phase of her life, the premarital phase, in which she could truly and surely claim that she was alone. Then I married, and from that moment I became pregnant. From the moment I became pregnant for the first time, I shined myself over, so to speak, to other people. Deep within, there rose Deep within there rose a desperate willingness to unlearn her present, her role as a supervisor, and her constant stewardship of the family. She was now determined to get back her own self. So now I have to learn to be myself again. This learning to be myself meant many ups and many downs at the same time. First of all, she had to altogether forget that they were married inextricably. The next thing she had to be oblivious of was how her children would do without her help. Mrs. Parks, the daily woman, would surely be the next in line, and then the grand house with a well tended garden in Richmond. Now, Henry Rousseau, a French historian of our times, has enunciated in his book The Haunting Past how the past thwarts individuals from paying attention to the present or speculating the future. Interestingly, even the present can intercept someone from harking back upon the past for a temporal spatial support, mnemonic by all means. Undeniably, there are difficulties in accepting the reality of the past. An individual, as the French historian Francois Hartog argues in Regimes de Historicide, that an individual would like to be defined by her present than by anything else. He describes this tendency as presentism, but at the same time, he cautions that the presentism does not propose to create any rigid borderline between the past and the present. If we delve deep into these arguments, we at once see that the metaphor of travel characterizes memory the best and the fittest. This is where, and this is why in Lessing's story to Room 19, home serves as a traveling memory. Exactly in the way the Goethe University professor of Anglophone literatures and culture, Dr. Astrid Earle, uses the term in an article of hers of the same name. Shushan's mind was already howling with impatience in search of a slow emancipation away from the role of hub of the family into woman with her own life. Her efforts began almost like a travel, both literally and metaphorically. So I come to the ending. The home as a traveling memory thus turned out to be a defining characteristic of Shushan, who thought her existence was at stake if she failed to alienate herself from her home. People look for home for attaining identity, but here was Shushan Rawlings who was looking for home to attain anonymity. Only a nameless, placeless, coordinateless seclusion, Shushan thought, would give her that vehemently longed freedom. As a coveted place for seclusion, she chose the spare room at the top of the house, which immediately bore a cardboard sign that said private, do not disturb. But this was even more dissatisfying than what she every day suffered. The whole thing just proved to be a lifeless ploy, a cosmetic device at best to earn her the desired solace. But now there was a room, and she could go there when she liked. She used it seldom. She felt even more caged there than in her bedroom. I quickly, for the shortage of time, I'm coming to the last part of it. Thus, where she was committing suicide, and I have ended it saying, thus the dark river where Susan eventually drifted off into eventually turns out to be the very home whose location only the traveling memory can dare afford and ascertain. That's all. Thank you, everyone.
Groundbreaking, Tanimoy. Great paper. Thank you so much. Um, that we were all boiling with ideas while you were presenting. Thank you so much. So I don't know, Swati, we have
Yeah.
another presentation now.
Yes,
This was
we
the last.
yes we do. Since we have, this is going to be a joint presentation from these two young scholars, Shumeda Ghosh and Orgho Debnath, uh,
Okay.
and their paper says the partitioned soul in search of a home, comparing the quest for the soul in Lessing's works with that of the post-colonial South Asian feminist writers Ismat Chugtai and Gitanjali Sri, Tomb of Sand, that is. And to tell all a little about them, it would be Shumeda. They are both. Shumeda Ghosh is a second year student of the Department of Comparative Literature, Jadavpur University, who loves reading, expressing herself through bits and pieces of unsent letters and humming poetry. She cannot bring herself to write. She loves singing, and her research interests include translation studies, music therapy, biopsychology, and Korean pop music, of course. She has worked as a compiler in anthologies and is majorly a daydreamer with much love for literature. Olga Debnath completed graduation from Jadavpur University and is currently pursuing masters from the Department of Comparative Literature, Jadavpur University. He is particularly interested in post-colonial and decolonization studies and literature. He loves reading, singing, and writing poetry. He is currently working as a freelance writer in Mirchi Plus and occasionally goes for a city troll for just for the love of finding some new ghats and bylanes of Kolkata. He loves to translate and listen to good music. So, two very interesting people, scholars, young scholars here. There's Orgho on screen, and I think there's Shumeda who has been here for quite some time now. So, Orgho and Shumeda. Over.
Hello. So, good evening, everyone present here. Myself, I'm Orko, and as we have already known, the title of the paper is "The Partitioned Soul in Search of a Home: Comparing the Quest for the Soul in Lessing's Works with that of post-colonial South Asian feminist writers Ismat Chugtai and Gitanjali Sri." Our paper aims to focus on the soul's quest for a shelter at both macro and microcosmic levels, keeping in mind the works of Lessing and the construct of quote-unquote home in a partitioned body, drawing parallels to the writings of post-colonial South Asian feminist writers. So Shumeda will start the paper and I'll continue.
ये वो शहर तो नहीं जिसकी आरज़ू लेकर चले थे यार कि मिल जाएगी कहीं ना कहीं. This is not the dawn we had hoped to discover, my friend, when we set out, that sure we would find it somewhere. Home, a place with myriad meanings and an entire sea of expectations. The light that brightens a darkened room where the walls do not cave in and it feels like a warm blanket on a cold winter night, a shoulder to cry on, where it feels like home with all its random fallouts and innumerable imperfections, a place it breathes amidst all the chaos. Yet, in a place so serene, the chirping of birds is soon faded by the ear splitting sound of gunshots, cries of myriads, screams, and muffled pleas for help. Suddenly, the shelter we go back to disappears, and there remain some people, some stories that are left unheard. We see refugees with dried throats and bare feet, naked from within, out in search of a home. At times, home comes with different interpretations, and the search for assurance and shelter continues, be it in the form of partitioned desh or be it in the quest of finding one's own self, soul, or body. The home we crave lies within the gentle touch of assurance from our loved ones. At times, the home we crave lies within ourselves, where the search for one's own identity becomes the primary point of existence. Home reminds us of our own existence. Flipping through the pages of Gitanjali Shri's Tomb of Sand, quoting, we are talking about returning home, but in this story, it's the home that's returning, and the people who live there are changing locations. And it is not just here, but also in Ismat Chughai's roots, and even in Doris Lessing's The Grass is Singing. For women, home has never been constant. Time and again, the incessant strife between prioritizing home at its macro and microcosmic levels while trying to balance their personal and societal ideals all the same has led women to lose the sense of belonging in general. Even if they do end up finding what they lost, it only seems like a fleeting moment, an elusive idea of temporary fellowship. To focus on a specific backdrop, we see how all the aforementioned texts deal with the time following the colonial era, near to entering a stage of political independence, and the word associated with freedom, yet ironic as it suggests that freedom and independence turn one homeless. They are left to adjust in a desh they do not recognize, a self they have left in a quest for. In fine arts and in popular culture, it is different. It is a different body that crosses boundaries. Where the boundary is crossed, a confluence forms. Man-woman mashup. And is the same accepted by the society, a man-woman mashup? One can also view it as challenging gender roles, and in this case, it happens within the constraints of colonial society, only to be overwhelmed by the oppressive or supposed progressive environment and their own inner struggles. Both Gitanjali Shri's Rosie and Lessing's Mary challenged the gender roles in their contemporary society. The former as a member of the quote unquote Hijra community, the latter as a woman prey to people's judgments. Rosie identifies herself as Raza, a true self she craved to be, but the societal norms and the gender stereotypes that are imposed on her lead to the unfulfillment of her wish, the quest to find one's own self remaining incomplete. Mary Turner, on the other hand, goes to marry a farmer due to desperation that grasps her after she hears her friends making fun of her behind her back. Being someone who always chose a life that needed more strength, a life of not being a mother or a wife, but rather of being successful even if she stood alone, she found contentment in being involved in farm work or supervising the natives when her husband fell ill, thus challenging the gender norms and putting forth a different identity at that specific period and setting. Though the problems that lie within supervising the narratives, within quotes, cannot be ignored, there lies an intersection to which Mary herself becomes a prey of colonialism and patriarchy. Therefore, the gender oppression she had to endure since birth can also not be ignored. To understand the body, one must first know the earth. On hearing this, we are immediately reminded of Ma's character from Tomb of Sand, two separate instances, once where she stands in a street of Lahore, pressing her hand between her legs, feeling her newly grown phallus, the cyst which she named thus, and once during the interrogations in Khyber, where she picks up a handful of soil when they ask about her home. It seems like the two instances fall in tune, a song of the Pied Piper leading you to find a home in your body, a home for the soul, a sense of self acceptance amidst all the negative comments hurled at one owing to the societal gender stereotypes. The constant struggle faced by the character of Rosie in their contemporary period comes to the limelight as we see her telling Ma how no one cares about people like them. There is no piece of literature, film, shop, advertisements, nothing for them. Even if she got thrown in a lake one day, no one would notice. And they really did not. It is when her absence alarms Ma that Rosie gets discovered after much search, her body left to rot in a box, her head thrashed by her tenants over a trifle, leaving her without a home, a self. We cannot help but let a tear fall down our cheeks. Rosie was correct. No one cared. A brutal reality of our society. It has to be mentioned, though, that Mary Turner falls in the category of the oppressor, a white woman, though poor white as mentioned in the story, yet one that looked down on the natives, the backdrop being of southern Rhodesia, and also subjected them to brutal physical torture, besides hurling at them all sorts of verbal profanities, specifically towards a native named Moses. But still, Mary falls prey to the patriarchal society, and while she deserves to be criticized when judged on the basis of the brutal torture she hurled at the natives like the other whites, gender norms make her a victim, finally leading to her tragic murder. A woman is faced with a set of societal expectations, as Mary did, and so are Betty, Bahu, Ma, and Rosie, all of them in a quest for home, even if that's a fleeting moment of temporary shelter, the idea of body as a home.
The quest for one's own identity remains interlinked with the quest for home in oneself. Within quotes, she could not recognize herself in the picture they had made of her. In a retrogressive patriarchal society, women are expected to behave in a certain way, or else they are subjected to being bad-mouthed, depreciated, and time and again made to doubt their self-identity. To be a quote-unquote good wife and mother or daughter becomes the sole reason for their existence. The existence of women in post-colonial societies also imposes on them a set of duties, veiling it all under quasi feminist beliefs. Pressing from the previous points, the body is mind, the mind finds its way via the body. When a woman chooses to live a bit differently from what is expected of her, people talk behind her talk behind her back, making her a laughing stock, destroying her picture of her own self, breaking a home she built so intricately over years. When the roof of her house comes crashing down, she loses just another home she had taken the risk of calling her own. The inclination towards nature, as shown by Mary, Ma, and Betty, brings us to the Sufi idea of being closer to nature, of finding a home in it, from where it all started in the first place. Mary Turner's quest of building an identity from scratch and then falling into the same rabbit hole due to society's negative projection of their insecurities through her reminds us of Ma and Betty as well. The negative projection of their insecurities through her. The former slowly uh, building herself after her husband's death, while the latter leaving home and eventually establishing herself, both even then falling prey to impending tragedy, a loss of self in its eternity. Quotation starts, everyone has wronged us, strangers have done it, and our own have done so well. What is home if not the four walls giving us shelter where we can come to after a sad or happy day? What is home if we do not get a shoulder to weep over our troubles and sorrows? What is home if we do not get a chance to laugh aloud and express our own thoughts? What is a home if not the desh that binds us to our roots, the soil that we carry in our hands, a home without the four walls, under the vast open stretch of the sky where limits are marginalized? When Mary thoughts of home, she remembered a wooden box shaken by passing trains. As instance of woman associating home with trauma, in Mary's quest of home, she left the box and returned to the box again, a result of the patriarchal norms prevailing in society. When the character of Amma in Isma Chuktai's short story, Roots, stubbornly says back during the desire of partition, letting her family leave from other country,
Assalamualaikum.
her state is explained thus, within quotes, but she was silent and her face looked more
Acha.
weary than before, as though she, after her quest for a land over centuries, was exhausted, and she seemed to have lost herself in that
আচ্ছা
quest. Quotation ends. This
শরীর এখন
reminds us
ভালো
of
আছে
Ma from Tomb of Sand, who goes back to Pakistan in quest of a
আচ্ছা
home, be it her lost lover Anwar Ali as the embodiment of the home, or the place she has forced to migrate from, the place that gave her Rosie, the statue of
দিয়েছে কালকে
Buddha, all that was
হ্যাঁ
significance, all that which made her feel like home.
16
Even if,
দিনের মাথায় দিল
ironically, the home that once forced her to flee to save herself becomes the temptation that eventually leads to her
হ্যাঁ
tragic fall. a tragedy in its entirety. Both
আচ্ছা, আচ্ছা,
masks shows a sense of clinging onto one's roots as they near their ends.
আচ্ছা,
The idea of forced partition migration of
আচ্ছা।
the idea of forced partition migration of being uprooted,
না
of
লাগবে না।
dislocation,
তো ইয়েতে
grief
তো
and
পেয়ে গেছি।
torture presents to us a vivid picture of
না,
loss,
ওনার নাম্বার নেই। তুমি দাও,
all-consuming,
আমি মেসেজ করে
overwhelming
দিচ্ছি
loss
হোয়াটসঅ্যাপে।
of self and in quest for home. All those characters, though find their home and
আচ্ছা, ঠিক
happiness, and
আছে,
even
ফরওয়ার্ড
meet
করে দিচ্ছি।
societal expectations,
আর
it all seems like a fleeting moment,
আসলে
a
এই
brief
যারা
utopic
ফিল্ডে কাজ
world
করছে,
to
লেবার,
live in,
লেগ
to
ওয়ার্ক যারা
hold on
করছে,
to before everything
তারা
is
আমার
snatched
মনে
away
হয়
from
ওই
them, leaving them
ইনশাল্লাহ বলে সব
homeless.
আল্লাহর উপর ছেড়ে দেওয়া পার্টি।
Even at times, the home we search for lies in the company of another person.
যাই
It is
হোক,
the person who completes the home. It is that in the text Tomb of
হতে
Sand,
পারে।
we find that Betty and her partner KK having tough times
হুম,
to live in together. So they drifted apart. Later we find when Betty accompanied Ma to her homeland Pakistan and due to a sudden turn of events got themselves locked behind the bars. It was then Betty who was once within quotes silly girl raised with the vanities and willfulness of a pampered princess, ignorant of the pitfalls around her, realized that her home lied to the person she had once thought of leaving. The same tune of longing to return to one's beloved resonates in Ma's voice when she sings, "Go, messenger, go, I'll send a message with you. Ever since my beloved went away, I have not slept in peace." To bring it all the same concept of shelter, the Sufi idea of quotation starts, "Woman in the world, not of it," quotation ends, weaves the interpersonal and intrapersonal story of dislocation, partition, migration, gender identity, racial supremacy, retrogressive patriarchal norms, boundaries, quest for self, love, and finally a never-ending quest for home. As we see in Rosie, the quest to find her own self remains unfulfilled. Even Betty, who considered herself to be a quote-unquote free woman who does not actually need a home, finds out in confinement that she loves Keke, her home, which lies beyond the borders in India. In case of Ismat Chuktai's roots, we find Amma realizes in the end that family is the soul of the home, which at times the narrator in the Tomb of Sand uttered while talking about relationships and the notion of safe space. Similarly, in The Grass is Singing, Mary Turner was being judged at every instance, and in the end, she herself became the prey of the colonial mindset that that was structured by the society. On the other hand, Ma's quest for hope lies with the soil, the memories of her childhood and her lover, and all this was marked by a single event in history, partition. Sticking to women's journey of relocating their identity, the soul's search for a hand amidst the chaos, the representation of all the women that loved and lost, in some case found themselves, even though temporarily, have been majorly invisibilized by a society built upon seeds of patriarchy, colonialism, overshadowing resistance, and cries of help with blatant brutality and social, economic, and sexual injustice. The pangs of separation and the longing to find one's own home, a safe space bounded by memories and thoughts, remain unattained in all the texts and we have talked about in our paper. Pressing from Rhodesia to India, the woman's journey against all odds remains the same, and in the course, the home got partitioned, lost, and probably never found. As Ma burst out laughing and said, "Yeah, they made you and me two separate countries." Thank you.
That was a very, very smart and intelligent paper. Very smart presentation and very pertinent, very interesting paper. Nobody would have, uh, I think, Ratna, you'll agree. No one thought of putting together Lessing and the newfound Gitanjali Shri, but they have done it. So, yes, I think that was very, very pertinent. Yeah. And I also think that, the grasses singing is something which people come back to time and again, which is maybe because it's more manageable than other Lessing novels, and also because it has so much to do but every reading opens it up, and you did it too, because when you're looking at Mary in a completely different, not completely different, but in a much more like Sumedha said, that something that we cannot forget, that although even we sympathize that she belonged to the more entitled race, and took advantage of that, even though she was also oppressed. And so, yeah, very, as I said, a very good, very well done paper. So, is Budhana there, Ratna there? Are you going to put forward any more questions to them?
Shweti, I think Ratna was saying something, but her
And
mic was off.
she's muted. Yes, Ratna.
Yeah.
I was saying that this was an excellent paper, excellent joint paper, and one looks forward to this kind of, I hope Sumedha and Argya will continue to work together and dazzle us in this manner. Really enjoyed listening to everybody in this session because,
Yeah, all the papers were.
one can actually go back and sleep on the fact that Lessing is in good hands.
Yeah, if they can move on with her, yes. I'm really glad they have kind of joined this boat and is thinking of Lessing through so many different perspectives and comparative tools or texts, that that is itself is very exciting for people who've been with her for a very long time, I guess. Yeah.
I think that they show that Lessing is like Shakespeare for all times and for all generations. Is that
Absolutely.
It was
approach from
Gail Green, wasn't it, who shifted from Shakespeare to Lessing?
Sorry?
There's this critic called Gail Green. She began her work on Shakespeare.
Okay.
Then she changed and began to swear by Lessing because she felt that Lessing was really the 20th and 21st century Shakespeare. I think that's very interesting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Swati, I think we're reaching the end of this day.
Yes, we are.
I don't know if there are questions.
Are there any other questions other than?
I can see only words of praise to all participants and mainly to the last two papers from Wided, from Ahmed, from Tanmoy.
Yeah, all the papers have been congratulated if you go up, you scroll up.
Yes,
All of them.
absolutely. And I think since this was the first, it was a student paper section. I do hope you people join the presenters who were there, the young scholars. I would personally request you to be there tomorrow when there is going to be the panel discussion, because there are going to be submission, but you all have also delved so much into her work. So I think it would be interesting for you, and B, if the moment there's an open house, it's going to be interesting what you can come up with, where the panel discussion is on how the Gen Zs read Lessing. So I think you've already read her today. So it would be a new take, a new way of pitching in tomorrow. So I do hope you make some time and join us tomorrow at the same time, 6 p.m. India time, 1:30 Tunisia time, and we look for some more exchanges, which is going to be good. And Samika says she's going to be there. But Ratna, would you be interested? Like, there are certain um, stories, like who would have thought a woman and a cat, getting explored and like being opened up once again, and to room 19 once. Incidentally, Tanmoy, to room 19, because you all are reading the short stories, obviously much more easier. But to room 19, your Ratna will also agree, has been taken. The travel continued in the summer and in other later works.
Absolutely. Even
Where,
I think.
Ratna ma'am asked a very pertinent question when Professor Shambhu ended his paper today that, well, in which way can we relate Chuktai's Lihov, the
Absolutely.
story that we have so many times gone through, and there the female desire, and how can we actually relate the question of female desire to to room 19, where it is a question of something else, that, well, she is deciding to commit suicide not for any other thing. So in which way? So if I'm not wrong, that is something where Ratnama was trying to uh, ask the presenter.
Yes.
Yes. So the question was really pertinent. I fully agree. Yes.
Thank you, Tanmay.
Yes, the difference that is obviously that was there between Chuktai, which Ratna so clearly states it's a celebration, whereas to Room 19, I'm sure it ends on a much more despondent note, and Lessing doesn't like it herself. It takes it up later, and
Absolutely.
there is more celebrations to come thereafter
I was
because
thinking that,
she gets the answer. I think she was
she
looking for
steps out
something.
of room 19, so you have Kate in Summer for the Dead.
Absolutely, you have Kate.
Then you have the protagonist of the fifth child as well. These are all women with large
Absolutely,
families, and the marriage is falling apart, and they're
and
coming to terms with so many different things.
I know,
And so there is this seismic shift as she moves from generation to generation. So,
absolutely.
you know, uh, and I was just thinking that somewhere in the middle, since we are talking about home, and I'm afraid to say these things because there is all of tomorrow, somewhere in landlocked, somewhere in the four, no, not landlocked, the four gated city,
Forget it. Yes,
actually looking at what I think is Lessing's most powerful discovery for all of us. That,
absolutely,
yes, you must have a study, and you must have a wall, and you must have a map of the world on it. And you
absolutely.
have to be engaged because this is your blood pulse, what's happening everywhere in the world. And that she starts, if you look at the dates, end of the 60s. So it's extremely visionary, her notion of the home and the world, to borrow that from some other context altogether.
Ma'am,
Absolutely.
Ratna ma'am, there
Yes.
is something I'd like to share with you, is that in Old Woman and Her Cat, ma'am, it is not the home actually. Look, the woman was actually founder of the perambulator.
Yes.
She was founder of the perambulator, the streets, the people, and she really lived for a very short time in her home. I mean, it's not about the home actually, but her cat. The question of her is important in the title. The old woman and her cat. The question of possessiveness. So, kind of, the home is, it's not the home where they are. Rather, the cat and the woman where they are living, it is their home. That is the best
Absolutely.
part of the story.
Uh,
No, and
I
it's also a very powerful narration, because I was just thinking there is this poet that I teach to my students. This is Eunice de Souza. You must have heard of
yes,
her.
yes.
Yes, ma'am, I
She
have read
has
her
this
poetry.
poem which is called Advice to Women,
Two women. Yes,
and
that's the
it's
one.
about cats.
Yes, how
And
to be a cat and
yes,
be
and
like
Eunice
a
de
cat.
Souza tells women, who have been, not a physical space. It can't be a physical space. It has to be a metaphysical space. And then when I stumble upon that discovery, I think, but Milton said this when he said that the mind in its own place can make a heaven out of hell and a hell out of heaven. So, somewhere this is really the very, very breathless moment to which an
Let,
insight often leads us.
Ratna, you
Yes.
made me think of two things. First, of the memoir of a survivor,
Yes.
where a woman does not find a safe space in the outside world, neither in her home, so she had to go the other side of the wall looking for an
Through the wall,
alternative.
through the wall.
Yes, through the
Yes.
wall.
Absolutely.
And there is also the idea of the cat. I think it's very symbolic because it comes back in different works by Lessing. She even mentions that in The Wind Blows Away Our Words, and she even refers to the prophet and how he loves his cat, and she compares this to the situation we treat animals in general. But the cat is symbolizes um, symbolizes an animal that creates its own space. Means that they don't have, they are not as fidel and attached to humans and to cats the way other animals
Any
are.
laptop
The
sitting on.
cat finds a space for itself. So I think that this is a kind of hidden message that I read throughout her works, because she refers to cat several times. It's not even in the memoir of a survivor. There is this half cat, half
Half cat,
dog.
half dog,
Hugo.
half cat. Hugo.
Hugo.
Yeah,
Yes, absolutely. Very fascinating. And she herself, she had all these dogs back in Rhodesia. And when she comes to
But
England,
it's only the cats,
cats, and she
Rufus and
celebrates
all
them.
of them.
Yeah.
Yes. But something else that I was thinking of, keeping in mind, I think it was Samikha who began with an attempt at home being what was the home, and Tonmoy bringing in that a home is not, it's the perambulator is something she's more attached to than the home.
Yeah.
Perhaps, it kind of returns to what Samika was trying to say, that maybe home was where once upon a time we thought in terms of where our ancestors lived and we were born and we lived. But at the end of the day, when you're talking, Tonma, maybe you're saying that home is an idea of something which one is attached to. I think, and Pahul Deep was talking about attachment once again in terms of home. So we come together, and then there is the last paper of Sumedha and Argo, who are talking about how people are becoming homeless, whether it is Mary homeless or it is Ma Beti homeless, because they are not being allowed to be attached to anything. They are being made to, disengage with things which are their own, and hence they are homeless, and hence they keep questing for homes,
Mm.
thinking of homes. And homes are what, Ratna, you are saying, that rooms, homes, not physical spaces at all, unlike what cats would try to claim. But for we humans who are not cats, um, for us, maybe it is something much more metaphysical, and something which we carry with us in terms of a perambulator. Tanmay must also remember that pile of that bundle of cloths that she carried, the gypsy way. After all, the woman is a gypsy, one who is homeless, one who doesn't have roots. So I think all four papers talk about
Let's-
disengagement, attachment, home, memory, and how it is not, it's a psychometry that we want and we do not get, maybe. So more of this, more of Lessing, as we always say. So more of Lessing tomorrow night, tomorrow evening. We begin at 6. There were some students who had joined. Thank you so much for being here. Some of them were doing what Radhari had advised us, like Ria and Orunima and Shrestha. They were taking down notes so that we can get a report later on. And thanks to Kasir and Adrija, who allowed this completely smooth webinar. So a huge clap goes out to them. Like, we've all connected without any glitches, everything out, um, even before we knew it. So thanks so much. Both of them are behind. Aritro has also done his work. So looking forward to more such uh, power and support from you tomorrow, and see you all tomorrow. It's really late for some of us, and the day ends for people in Tunisia. Bye, and we connect back tomorrow.
goodbye. See you tomorrow. Thank you for
Good night.
joining.
Yeah. Buthaina, could you just copy the all the messages in some